United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's begin with public audience. Joan.
Joan Coe, 26 Whitcomb Drive. After decades of politically elected first selectman as the CEO of Simsbury, we have changed to a professional manager to streamline services with efficiency and management. Town manager Maria Caprioli was employed in Mansfield prior to her employment in Simsbury. As the CEO of Simsbury, she has the ability to hire new employees to provide professional services to the taxpayers. It appears that many of the new employees come from Mansfield with highly credentialed resumes. A town manager should have a cohesive working team with new ideas while understanding the government's role in providing services. Diversity in the workplace usually provides more vibrant ideas from past employment in diverse communities. The town manager is required to provide a budget to the Board of Selectmen that reflects revenues and expenditures. When revenues are diminished as a result of special favors to a politically active constituency, there is an increase in taxes to offset the reduction of revenues. The Simsbury Meadows Performing Arts Center, PAC, has consistently asked for waivers and special favors in reduction of fees that reduce the revenues in the budget. The PAC has consistently advocated their independence from the town as a private organization when it benefits their organization, and is an adjunct of town when they need money. My complaint against the PAC with the Freedom of Information Commission asking that the PAC be designated a public agency was dismissed, with the caveat that if they continually get more funding or other special favors from the town, the commission would reopen my complaint. The taxpayers that are subsidizing this, quote, private organization have no knowledge of the PAC budget or the salary of Missy Donino, executive director of the PAC. The taxpayers are subsidizing a private organization with tax dollars. The Board of Selectmen are complicit in this charade by voting for their revenue reductions for the sole purpose of getting elected. This is unacceptable. Once again, the Board of Selectmen is asked to give the PAC a waiver on building permits for a private organization, Circus Smirkus, from Greensboro, Vermont. The Simsbury Meadows Land and other town parks, under the direction of the Simsbury Recreation Department, rents the land to athletic groups for seasonal activities on a fee-based schedule to cover the cost of providing services. They don't ask for waivers. Why is the PAC given financial support through waivers and use of town buildings at the Simsbury Meadows? The Board of Selectmen should deny the waiver of $2,500 in building fees for Circus Smirkus. The 1920 budget reflects an expenditure of $12,000 for paddle courts resurfacing and painting. Included in the expenditure is the cost for repair of the wires around the courts. I have been playing paddle for decades at Simsbury Farms on various teams and have a perspective on the needs and conditions of the courts. An integral part of the game is taking the ball off the wires. The wires surrounding the courts have years of fatigue and are in need of replacement. As the trajectory of the ball on the wire declines, so does the play. As a footnote, this year I played 3 matches as a substitute on the paddle team with various partners, and I won all my matches. The Council of Small Towns, COST, is proposing legislation for cost sharing that would shift costs of education to towns. One of the most burdensome expenditures of the state and boards of education is the monetary support of the Capital Region Education Sharing, CREC, a public-private education delivery process that has proven to be costly and ineffective. Simsbury's Board of Education budget reflects $200,000 in expenditure for these services in transportation and education of students living in Simsbury. As a proponent of public education, a retired teacher and a substitute teacher, I think it is time to dismantle CREC, an experiment that failed to deliver their mission, and return all students from CREC schools to the public schools in their respective communities. With declining enrollment, we can absorb all the displaced students from the CREC schools. All the buildings used by CREC should be repurposed for mental health and addictive services, as the increase for long-term mental health care is reaching epidemic proportions. I attended a March 19, 2019 Board of Finance meeting where I was experimenting with earphones with a streaming video on my phone that had a delay. When Selectman Sean Askman stated that I was the only person in the room that had lived in Simsbury over 50 years with past history when discussing the 350 celebration of Simsbury, I had a delay in reacting to his observation. At the time of the last celebration, we all made costumes for our children that were worn in the schools, and other organizations participated without having a gala event costing taxpayers $35,000. All of my comments will be posted on Simsbury Patch, Twitter at Joan Co., and Newsfeed on Facebook. Thank you for listening. I'll put my name down here.
Thank you very much, Joan.
Thanks, Joan.
Who else would like to speak in public audience? Mark?
Over there. Don't let them call you yet. Now they can start.
Don't worry, I'm not starting the clock early.
I had to book.
Hi, my name is Mark Orenstein, and I live at 82 Old Meadow Plain Road. And while I'm principally here tonight to support the library initiatives, I thought I'd talk about a couple of other things that are close to me. One is Simsbury Community Television. Simsbury Community Television is a locally run and operated PEG TV station. PEG stands for Public Education and Government, three separate channels. The FCC is proposing to redefine what a franchise fee is, and it will radically reduce the level of monetary support available to run PEG access channels across the United States. PEG access channels provide government coverage that allows transparency so citizens can monitor local government actions, something vital to the health of the local democracy. PEG access channels provide local content in communities that are not served by the broadcast industry and are increasingly underserved by newspapers. They help prevent media deserts in towns and cities across the U.S. and ensure diversity of opinion at the local level. Okay. Now there is a petition available. If you go to the facebook.com/Simsbury TV website and select posts and scroll down a couple, you'll be able to click on a petition that will go to Blumenthal, will go to Murphy, will go to Hayes, I think, and try to push congressional oversight of this particular docket. Second thing I wanted to talk about briefly was Microsoft and Windows 7 for home users. A long time ago, Microsoft announced that the last day of security patches, particularly for home users, would be January 14th of 2020. And that means sometime after that, within a month or two after that, as more security exposures are discovered, home users are going to be really exposed. So now is the time for home users to, if they're still using Windows 7, to really consider how they're going to upgrade. You can upgrade by buying a new laptop or PC, or you can upgrade in place on your existing PC, especially if it's within 5 or 6 years old, and install Windows 10. And if a town resident that happens to be a senior has an issue with this, if they give me a call at SCTV, I'd be more than happy to provide them some assistance in doing it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Stephen?
Thank you. Everyone's got footwork tonight.
Hi, how is everyone?
Hey, Steve.
Good.
First off, I'd like to thank everyone from the Selectmen who have been enthusiastic supporters of the Simsbury 350th Celebration Committee. However, I'd like to give you a quick update regarding the status of that same Simsbury 350th Anniversary Committee. In March of 2018, this Board of Selectmen initiated the establishment of a committee for celebrating Simsbury's 350th anniversary. I was invited to that initial meeting and later elected to chair that committee. We have had multiple monthly meetings every month with many volunteers who formed our steering and executive committees. Together, we crafted the presentation delivered at your meeting on January 14th of this year. You may recall that our presentation provided an overview of our goals, organizational structure, fiscal sponsor, a dedicated committee for fundraising, and a plan for many complementary events, including our 5 new and special events. We finished this presentation listing 4 key asks that would be required from the town in order for the 350th committee to succeed. First was seed money in the amount of $35,000 to create the infrastructure and associated startup costs. Even though we received enthusiastic backing by the Board of Selectmen, last week the Board of Finance denied us any funding whatsoever. So you're all set there. Our second was for a facilitation of town-owned venues being provided with a waiver of any rental fees. The town has not been able to provide for this for a multitude of reasons. Number 3 was for a staff liaison. This request was granted. And I thank Lisa Karam of the Simsbury Public Library for being that person. The final request was town insurance coverage for these events. We have been told the town's insurance policy will not be made available for these town celebrations as we are not an official town committee. As you can see, it has been an uphill battle. Some organizations and people seem to view the Simsbury 350th Committee as an independent entity vying to compete with established annual events. We have also been told that any celebrations we pursue will compete with already established town activities and diminish the funding, volunteers, and attendance for these already established events. In reality, ours is a group of townspeople willing to volunteer their time and effort in the hopes of celebrating the anniversary of a town we love. This is all we are. We are nothing more. We really needed all 4 of our requests, and the absence of even one of them was detrimental to any possibility of this committee proceeding. In hindsight, this committee should have been formed as a town committee. I know it would have been a more complex implementation, but then it could have laid claim to all 4 of our essential needs with no hindrance. Remaining options for the celebration of Simsbury's 350th anniversary might be for individual organizations to take an event and bring it to fruition on their own. Perhaps First Church could still host a celebration of the town's incorporation on May 12th. Perhaps Parks and Rec could still bring the bike parade, which was a wonderful concept, to life. The Boy Scouts could still do River Day, but probably remove the public component of it. And the Performing Arts Center is more than capable of developing the Simsbury Fair as an evolution of their Septemberfest. In closing, I am only a townsperson myself, one that considers himself very, very fortunate to be born, raised, and living an extremely blessed life in a town that I truly love. I am proud of my town, and even though it is now apparent that a 350th anniversary committee cannot exist as I once shared a vision of, I hope we all celebrate how very fortunate we are to be the town of Simsbury often and selflessly. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Would anyone else like to speak in public audience? Yeah, Susan.
Susan Messino, 41 Madison Lane. I had 2 things that I wanted to bring up tonight. First of all, I don't know if anyone else is mentioning it, but the bears are waking up, so I want to make sure that people are really aware of taking down your bird feeders, tying your garbage bags tightly, making sure your garbage is secured. We don't want bears to feel welcome in our neighborhoods or in our yards, so stop taking pictures, go out and yell at them and tell them to leave, because they don't belong in our neighborhoods. But if we make our trash a fast food restaurant, how can they resist? So, and the reason I really want to emphasize that is I think some people have gotten the mistaken impression that if we do authorize bear hunting in Litchfield County, that will help with the bear problem. But those are 2 totally separate issues. If we hunt bears in Litchfield County, it's not going to help the bear situation in Simsbury. The problem is really us. And the risk of bear hunting is that if you leave a bear as an orphan bear, they don't learn from their mother foraging activity, den building activity, and that bear is likely to become a nuisance bear. So the last thing we want is more nuisance bears. So stop taking pictures and be mean. Don't like to be mean, but we need to be not nice to bears in our yard. The second thing I'm here for is I have a nice poster now for the Old Growth Forest Connecticut premiere film that's going to be at Cine Studio on Thursday, March 28th at 7:30. I'm not really sure where I'm supposed to show this, so I'll just wave it slowly. And due to a glitch on the Cine Studio website, it's not listed on there, but I can promise you it will be held. It's free for everyone. There'll be an expert panel, and it's been selling out in Massachusetts with waiting lists to venues that are seat about 100 people. They've had waiting lists up to 60 additional people, but Cine Studio can seat 459 people. So I'm optimistic we will have room for everyone. So I hope you will come and enjoy this movie. And I have a smaller one I'll leave on the counter as you enter Town Hall. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Anybody else tonight for public audience? Okay. Then we'll move on to our first presentation, the library fine-free proposal. It's a proposal to eliminate most fines on overdue library items, and it's coming to us as a recommendation from the Library Board of Trustees. And for the presentation tonight is Rachel Gravel, who's the head of Borrowing and Technical Services.
Terrific. Thank you so much. As he said, my name is Rachel Gravel. I would like to thank Maria and the Board of Selectmen for allowing us this opportunity to present this proposal to you. So I'm here to talk about our fine-free proposal. So while libraries have changed tremendously over recent decades in terms of the resources, services, and spaces they offer, one holdover from the past has persisted: overdue fines. And so despite access being a core value of librarianship, libraries are really finding that, fines are serving as a barrier to people using the library, and they're undermining the library's mission to connect patrons to the materials they need to support a lifetime of learning. And so that's fundamentally why the library is here to talk about going fine-free. This was approved by our board of trustees in December, and this proposal is very much grounded in the library's mission and strategic goals. And you'll find that our arguments that we're going to be talking about in our proposal are really very much grounded in research and are data-driven. Data-driven decision-making is huge in libraries. We care very much about that. So we are going to present to you these important arguments we think in favor of going fine-free, and then we're also going to talk about two special considerations that have come up in the community as concerns about this proposal, and I hope to be able to address those things for you. So first, I just want to briefly note that going fine-free is a forward-thinking initiative. It is something that a number of libraries across the region and the nation, whether they are large or small, urban, suburban, or rural, it's something a lot of libraries are considering and taking action on. And so, Simsbury Public Library has this opportunity to be part of that, that important move forward for libraries. But it is also not just a trend. We do want to talk about the real reasons behind why these libraries are going fine-free. So going fine-free would be another continuous improvement to the library's operations that would be made possible by other areas of automation in our library. So for instance, right now we automate all sorts of messages that go out to patrons about when their library books are becoming due, if they're overdue, and we also automate our renewals for a lot of folks, as long as there's no holes on the item and nobody else is waiting for it. So all these things are already doing a lot of the work for us in terms of reducing the amount of overdue materials we have and improving our on-time return rates, rather. So we know that our overdue materials are declining, and so therefore our overdue fine revenue is declining because of automation. And so as a result, we're already spending about half as much time as we used to in terms of actually collecting and managing overdue fines. So eliminating fines altogether would help to further reduce those layers of administrative work associated with fine collection and accounting. enabling our library staff to be leveraged in more productive initiatives that are in demands by our patrons, by our community members. So things like programming and promoting library resources and services and other strategic projects. So while we know that libraries are eliminating fines, they're using all these automated tools rather to reduce the amount of overdue materials that are coming through. We can actually see in our data that eliminating fines is actually quite effective too. It's not just efficient, it's effective. Because it's not affecting how many materials are coming back on time. Regardless of whether or not there are fines, people are still returning their materials on time. Largely, you can see that there's really no huge difference between, in this example of a bunch of different materials and loan periods, there's no huge difference between whether or not an item is returned on time, if there's a fine, or if there's no fine. So they're finding that while it's efficient and it's saving us staff time, it's also quite effective. As it turns out, the perceived purpose of overdue fines to prompt that return of materials on time doesn't actually hold water. It's sort of counterintuitive. It's surprising, but the data is truly bearing out. In fact, some libraries that have gotten rid of fines have found that more materials overall have been returned because patrons are not afraid of those fines. And we've heard that comment from our own patrons that I didn't want to return this book because I was afraid of how many fines I had racked up. And so it's a little counterintuitive, but the data is very interesting to look at. And we're even able to look within our consortium overall at libraries that have fines and libraries that don't. And then even within our Simsbury library, we can look at our patrons who have fines and who don't have fines. And so interestingly, Simsbury patrons return their materials 10 days before the due date on average, whether or not they have fines or not. And when you're looking at our Simsbury seniors who have no fines versus our regular patrons who have fines, the return rate is literally no different. It's just about the same. So it's really bringing back those materials, and so getting rid of fines would be effective in that it's not going to mean none of our books are coming back. Perhaps equally counterintuitive is that there's a chance that eliminating fines could actually contribute to higher circulation. So now that we have implemented automatic renewals, that which a lot of libraries consider as a first incremental step towards getting rid of fines and reducing overdue materials overall, we've already seen a 25% increase in circulation, which I think is quite impressive. And there is, a lot of libraries are seeing that their circulation numbers are going up after eliminating fines. And so, there's not quite yet enough data to say this is the reason why, but there's some good impressions there that there is a chance that we could be increasing the use of library materials. And it's, the role of the library is like a hub in the community for learning, which is, of course, part of our strategic goals. So going fine-free is demonstrably efficient and effective, but there are also customer and mission-focused reasons why I think it is important to go fine-free. We know that fines can be a source of great stress for patrons in the library. So removing fines from the interaction at the desk opens up that opportunity to greater, more meaningful relationships between the library and community members. In fact, many libraries that have eliminated fines have reported that they've seen an increase in new card registrations and a return of those previously blocked users. The sentiment of negativity around fines is not uncommon to our library too. We have heard this in our own patrons. They've reported that their friends have stopped coming to the library because of fines on their account. And families have cited as one of their fears about using the library is dealing with the fines bills. So if our goal as a library is to serve the community and to facilitate free and equal access to library resources, then eliminating fines would be a strategic, customer service focused, and mission-driven initiative. Removing fines would be a nice step forward towards promoting goodwill at the library desk and in the community. And perhaps most compelling to me as a librarian, and perhaps to folks in this room, is that fines can really set up a barrier to access to using the library. And arguably, it's for the folks who need the library most that it creates this barrier. So at many libraries, the financial punishment for materials, returned a few days late can very quickly add up for families and individuals on a budget and lead to account blocks, which cuts them off from both print and electronic resources for a balance as low as $10. Of course, fines inherently disproportionately affect people with low incomes. And while there is a significant amount of wealth in this community, of course, it is important to keep in mind that there are persons under the poverty line in Simsbury, and there are people, for instance, who are subsisting rather than thriving, and perhaps even collecting government or private benefits. And so a $10 fine might not mean a whole lot for some people in this room, but for a family in need, it is another stressor in their lives. And it is a true barrier to using the library. I have heard, for instance, from patrons who, as a child, had racked up bills on their child's account, and then were really reluctant to return to the library because they were afraid of encountering those fees again and dealing with it. I've definitely heard from families and parents, and I think if Stephanie Pareto, head of Children's, were here, she would attest to this as well. There are a lot of families and children who are affected by fines and their account blocks. And so, of course, we do make accommodations for families who reach out to us and ask about their account balances. But of course, that takes a little bit of bravery and getting over some embarrassment to ask. And so I think getting rid of fines and would remove this barrier to access that is a fundamental objective of fine-free policies, and it would serve Simsbury well in ensuring that the library is a community resource equally available for all generations. And I do want to so those are the primary arguments I think that support us going fine-free, but I do want to take a moment to address two key areas that have arisen since we first introduced this. First is the question of responsibility. There is this notion that people have in their minds that fines are supposed to teach people responsibility. Particularly, this comes up in the context of children. But my counter to that argument would be that actually libraries are neutral providers of resources and information, and that we don't instruct people in how to be responsible. We hold them accountable in terms of, being a responsible borrower, returning your books, but we don't teach what that means to be responsible. We find that that's something best left to families and communities to teach. And it is not, teaching responsibility is not a core value in librarianship. There is an articulated code of ethics and core values in our profession, and it's not in either of those things. Access is really what is foundational to libraries, and not teaching responsibility. Encouraging lifelong learning, exploration, and innovation, and promoting literacy, those are our primary goals. And so if we're setting up account blocks for people with a little bit of fines on their account, then that's really not serving our goal, I would argue. And I do want to make clear that we are still, making sure people are returning their books. They will still be held accountable, if you will, for lost, damaged, or unreturned materials. And so we will be, pursuing those items just as we are now. And for instance, patrons will continue to receive a bill about 30 days after their final due date if a book is not returned. And I say book, but, there's audiobooks, DVDs, other materials too. And so we can also still block those accounts too if people are truly not participating in returning those materials. And of course, the bottom line for this group is the budget. What is the impact here financially? So overdue fines, like all library revenues, feed the town's general fund. So it is difficult to determine exactly how much fines contribute to the library's budget in particular. Though I will note that a lot of libraries have found that its fines typically account for 1% or less of their particular budget. But we do want to look at how this might impact the town's overall budget. So we do know that fines have been decreasing. Fine revenue has been going down because there have been fewer overdue materials, which is great, especially since we have implemented automatic renewals. So the financial impact of this decision would actually be less severe than you might expect. And again, to be sure, we would still collect fees for lost and damaged materials, as well as library cards that are lost, for instance. And if we look briefly at those numbers, we can see that, for instance, the fees coming in is actually projected to go up this year, and the fines are projected to be about half of what we collected last year, again, because of automatic renewals. So we're already collecting almost half as much as we previously were, and we're collecting a little bit more in fees. So I think the financial impact could potentially be quite manageable. And then I will say too that potential revenue loss will be offset. The idea is that there's two ways that we hope to generate some income to offset that income loss. The first is we're slated to become a passport acceptance center quite shortly. And that would mean that we'd be collecting about $35 per application. And so I know we have folks going into training in a couple of months, and so we're very close to that happening. And then secondly, we are hoping to implement a library support jar. So instead of requiring people to pay the fines that are on their account, we can simply state something like, you know, you have a fine in X amount on your account, but we no longer charge fines. If you'd like to contribute to the library support jar, that's your choice. And so it opens up that opportunity for folks to participate. We know that libraries who have taken this approach have seen revenue come in from those collections that are basically on par and sometimes more than what they were collecting in overdue fines. We know that our patrons in the library, for instance, are quite supportive of the library. They're very generous. And so I think my, guesstimate is that that'll be the case for us as well. I think we could expect that we would collect quite a lot that way. And it would make patrons a partner in the library's mission, I think, when they're contributing in that way. So I think the question then for the board is to decide, is it worth it? Is that potential 10K loss, which we hope to make up for, worth it if we could put that staff to use in more productive ways? Is it worth it if we could improve the library's relationship with the community and improve citizens' access to library resources? And would it be worth it if we could forge more lasting goodwill in the community that creates library users for generations to come? And I think that is what I would like the board to consider.
Great.
So thank you very much for your time, and I am here and eager to answer any questions you might have.
Rachel, thank you very much. What questions do folks have?
So, great presentation, thank you. You certainly enlightened me on some of the questions I had. So, but help me out, because I agree, and I appreciate that you're not the teachers of moral instruction, but you are still holding people accountable. Mm-hmm. So you're just holding them accountable less than you did before.
No, I would say we aren't, because I think there's a semantic difference there too, in that we are expecting people to be responsible, but we're not saying that, we're not teaching them how to have that skill.
But you're still putting a time limit on it. Mm-hmm. You're saying at an arbitrary point that you've decided you're going to charge them.
Yes,
Still
and that
fine.
Thing is not arbitrary. It's about 3 weeks after the final due date, so it's one more loan period after that last due date.
But you could make it 6 months, you could make it a year, you could make it 2 years, on the
but
whole
the
premise of
consortium-
moral argument that they're good people, they're going to bring it back.
The
There's always an
consortium has
argument.
agreed that 30 days, that 30-day window is an accurate window to compel the return of materials. And
Yep.
so that's the point at which the 30 libraries in our partnership send out those notices to say, bring that book back, you think you forgot about it.
Yep.
That is negotiable too. I mean, it's a window that we could close if we needed to, or we could expand if there were for whatever reason a need to.
And the
All right.
reason, if I can jump in, the
Yeah.
reason that we're still holding people accountable for lost and damaged materials is because we still realize that we are stewards of the town resources, and our resources are shared resources for everyone in the community.
Fair enough. So of the 1069 that are blocked, how many of those are blocked by the $10 and how many are blocked because they lost or damaged a book?
Those are all people who are blocked by the $10 amount. Oops, I don't have that here.
But is it fine, there is a lost book?
And it's primarily going to be both fines and over lost books. It's
But
it's
if it
hard to
stops at
break out.
$10,
It's regardless of what that fine is, that dollar amount is from, whether it's fines or from lost materials, it's still that $10 cap.
but the fines can only get to $10 and then they stop, right?
Exactly. And most materials cost way more than $10, so it's
So you can-
usually not that.
I guess my point is then you can tell to some degree what's fines and what's fees.
Yes, you
If the
certainly
account
can.
balance is over $10. So do we know what's over $10?
No, not offhand.
Because I guess the 1069 doesn't mean anything to me if it's all fees.
It's not all fees, I'll not tell you that. Just looking at that, I don't have the number offhand of
I would
exactly.
say predominantly, if I were making my best guess, most of it would be fines and not fees for lost or damaged items.
Again, I'm not arguing with the research, but I'm shocked that 1,000 people are afraid to go to the library over $10. I mean, it just seems shocking to me.
But that is in fact, I think, the reality.
I'm not sure how to respond to that because I was surprised too when, coming to this town. I know it's a very affluent community, but I've had really hard conversations with families. I've been really surprised at how much this really truly can be a barrier for folks. And that can't be shown in numbers. Those are just true stories from real people.
Questions?
This is coming about 6 years too late for my family, potentially.
Fees are down.
But
Aren't you?
but the lost books are clearly still going to stay in place, it sounds like. No fear there.
1069.
We'll be buying that wing in 2025. So if I understand correctly, it's sort of a bit artificial in the sense that the auto renewal is moving into place, and that's just giving people more time to read their book, finish up, and then likely pay it, return it in a reasonable amount of time. It's not as if they're late because of some sort of nefarious reason. Okay, so I'm that's a great measurement that is proving to a certain extent your point. Do you have any? So when you talk about conservation or collection, like an insurance, Sean, so did you guys attach a percentage of actual collected fines versus what's actually charged? Is like you only collect like 20% of what you. That wasn't in
Yeah.
there, I don't think.
That's a good question.
If you don't have that, that would be an
Yeah.
interesting measurement to say what percentage we actually collect that we get charged. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you tell me it's 11%, and then the next question is, you did reference the cost of administration. And I'm super curious about that because again, we're talking about considering in our budget because you guys are working, you're doing 27 jobs with 4 people and stuff, and we got to add that resource back in, and if you're telling me that this is an $8,000 a year cost for a $10,000 likely reduction to what you're going to be charging for fees, and then you're only getting 11% of that 10, why are we doing it, right? That's another reason why to move forward with your concept. So maybe that might be a way to measure your, so cost of administration, percentage of collections received, and then benchmark it off that $10,000, and that might help you come to your decision.
Do you have any
From you.
projections, I'm sorry, were you finished?
I keep going.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Do you have any revenue projections on the passport application process?
Unfortunately, it's very hard to tell at this juncture. I can tell you that the Windsor Library collects about $2,100 in fines per year, in passport applications per year, but it's hard to say. What I can say is that we just had a passport event at the library that the post office ran.
Yeah.
And we know we were able to accommodate 20 people, but there was still a line out the door of people we could not accommodate. So I have a feeling it would be very popular.
I'm also thinking, but that would require a lot of staff time also. I've seen them at the post office having to do
Right.
applications.
It's by
and
appointment only.
It all stops, yeah.
Yeah, Sean?
I mean, if ultimately we do go down this road, are we, we're clearing the decks going forward, but is there any consideration for the 1069 looking backwards? Because those fines are still on, right?
Yeah,
I mean, those
that
are
would be
previously
forgiven.
incurred.
The idea would be to do a reset.
So we would need to be very clear on the language from our approval for that. We're not good on givens. We've got to be very explicit. Those are,
Library amnesty.
those are two different things. Yeah, amnesty going backwards versus the policy moving forward.
Are those outstanding fines accounted for anywhere in your budgeting, or do you essentially write them off?
We would have to write them off. Yeah, we would write them off because they're projected as revenue.
I know, but in your budget you just presented, are you counting on collecting fines or no?
We were counting on collecting fines, but what we're telling you is we're going to substitute the fines with the library support jar, which is a more positive interaction.
Yeah, I understand that, but hasn't been tried yet, so we don't really know how that's gonna work.
Well, we don't know how it's going to work in Simsbury. We
Yeah.
do know that across the country and even in here in Connecticut, libraries that have changed to a library support jar have actually brought in the same amount of revenue, if not more.
It's like a suggested donation at the
Right. No,
Natural History
I'm,
Museum.
I'm just concerned that we've already budgeted for a certain number of fines coming in and that now that it doesn't exist. So, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I'll just hop in. I think I could just add a bit to what Lisa had shared. So, excuse me, again, based on the research we have, I think that if we were to implement the support jar, we could reasonably anticipate probably breaking even or maybe even perhaps doing a little better. So if we were to pilot this program, what I would suggest that we would do is that we would leave the library fine account where we budgeted for fiscal 1920, but then we would deposit the support jar money into that account so we could essentially very easily track whether or not it's breaking even, it's a loss, we're gaining a bit. So again, if we were to pilot for a year and if we were to deposit those funds into that specific account, we could track it easily. Again, to see if our, if essentially our community panned out similar to what the research is showing.
But you could still end up in a deficit position.
It's possible, it's possible, it's possible.
But I
We'd
think
probably round that one.
the
but-
library's never projected its own revenue, as many of the departments here have not in the past. And
No, I know, I'm
For
just.
years historically,
yeah.
$44,000 has been projected as revenue from the library fees, or fines, sorry. And that's going
We've
down
never
every
actually
single
done
year.
that, yeah.
No, I agree.
Yeah, Sean?
I mean, this is pertinent because I think 3 years ago, a member of the Board of Finance yelled at us over the copying fees at the library, that they weren't sufficient from a revenue standpoint. Not your fault. But the Board of Finance does hold us accountable sometimes to the copying fee line item. Thankfully, we've moved past that argument.
You never know what they're gonna come up with, though.
And I'm not trying to be a process pain in the neck here. I'm willing to consider the pilot, but again, this is very clear. It does not say wiping the slate clean for anybody. And do we, A, have the authority to do that because it's previously accounted for, and B, how do we do it? Because there's one thing to pilot something going forward, it's another thing to say the slate's clean. And I'm not against it, it's just, again,
I mean, I think what is
we need to do it
important
the right way.
Yeah, and what's important to keep in mind too is that this is still going to be tracked within our library system. And so it's not, I should clarify, it's not wiping the slate clean entirely, so that is still there on their record. So for instance, if a year from now, you think this experiment has failed and we want to go back to collecting fines, that number is still there to work with. However, in the interim, we can treat it as invisible, if you will, in terms of them accessing the library's account, regardless of the amount of fine on their account.
Yeah, personally, I'm uncomfortable with that. I mean, we're giving them a holiday for a year, but then if we change our mind, we're right back to creating a negative experience.
There are some libraries that have done that, very, very few, but some have.
Yeah, I think our language could approach that. I mean, so for me personally, I had the advantage of, as liaison to the library, walking through this process at least once. And I saw and I am supportive of of authorizing the one-year trial. And what I saw on both the library board as well as myself and what I'm hearing here are a couple of, hey, wait a minute. First of all, it's counterintuitive. How can you actually have better adherence without fines? That's the first thing. The second is, come on, this is America. We hold people accountable. We have to teach our kids to be accountable. That's kind of the second.
I said that before the meeting, by the way.
What? Yeah, you did. Right. And the third is, hey, we're potentially losing a little bit of revenue with this. So what I saw happen with both the library board and for myself personally, if you kind of look at the essence of the proposal, we can debate the numbers, but there clearly is data that shows that adherence isn't necessarily negatively impacted by doing this. One. Secondly, potentially, adherence is increased. Certainly, we already have data that circulation can be increased with this. And the third is, there actually were quite a few people, as you started to talk with people, both at the library board meetings, outside the library board. I was surprised at the number of people who anecdotally would say, you know, when I owe a book, I'm embarrassed and I don't go, or I don't go back because my parents might not know that I owe this book. There is a surprisingly large number of people who didn't engage the mission of the library because of this. I think, you know, that evidence is out there. And if you step back and think about it, it really is human nature, right? No matter how small something is, we're embarrassed about it, and it will stop or prevent us from doing it. So I think for those three reasons, you know, we have a board that really thought this through pretty extensively. They've got reasons to support it. They're asking for a one-year trial, and I think that it is incumbent upon us to trust them in a recommendation that they've made that's very well thought through. And these, these counterintuitives don't really play out when you think them through all the way through. So I am a supporter of the one-year pilot.
And-
One more question.
Yeah, Sean.
Chief, are we gonna put an amnesty jar down in your office for speeding fines? No? Okay. I would love to pilot that.
Just checking.
Chris was hoping.
Yeah.
I'm worried
I'll get behind that one,
coming
Bruce.
next.
Chris is on board.
I'll cross any line for
Yeah.
that.
I'm just.
No, don't cross the line.
I'm saying, we talk out of both sides of our mouth up here all the time. We say fines don't work, and then we fine everybody for late things all the time, for building department stuff, for,
Fines obviously do work, and there are still fines associated with this proposal.
we just got told fines don't work.
Well,
In the
fees,
context of the
there's
library.
Yeah.
two different things we're
But
talking
at,
about.
but at the end of the day, if someone doesn't adhere, there's a consequence. There's a penalty. So it's not as
So
if
when you-
there's a complete
Moving along.
abandonment of the
When-
concept of.
When bringing, there is still a will that conversation still take place with an individual who brings a book back that is overdue and would have been due a fine to say, this, I didn't see that in it, this book is overdue and under our customary charging structure, it would have resulted in 5.
There's a really good chance, yeah, we would have that conversation for anybody who returns an item at the desk, but there are, of course, 2 book drops at the
I know.
library.
If
and
we fund the
materials
book drop,
returned to
though,
others.
we might, to get that book automated return, that's still out there. But I mean, there's a so to Sean's point, there's a conversation around accountability and what it's to be a good steward of the usage of the library's resources. This is what we expect from people.
Those come up
So I hope that
now,
conversation
even,
will at least take place if we do grant this.
So just maybe a sign, I mean, again, you guys think of it, but thank you for returning your book. Just want to, because we should publicize this if we're going to do it.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, people are still going to be wrongly afraid to come into the library.
Yeah.
Or the next time a person checks out to say, we realize that you returned your book at one, you realize that, it would have resulted in X fine. We hope that when you take this book out, you return it on time so that it would not. I mean, have that sort of conversation.
And here's
You
the
could put
jar.
those policies in place, I would think.
yeah, in non-judgmental ways, we can
Right.
do that for sure.
I think you should
Point
make
to
them a
the
little
jar.
judgy.
Well, we have a code of ethics that prohibits us from doing that.
Okay.
You can give them a look.
I'm hearing, yeah, Mike?
I'm really, I'm challenged by this, let me put it that way. I understand that you are trying not to be confrontational about holding people accountable, but I'm sorry, I'm the old guy up here. Accountability is accountability, and I have brought books in and I have paid fines because, you know what, my kids moved out and cleaned up and look what I found, and I went down and paid the fine. And was I excited about it? No. But it was the right thing to do. And I don't think you can be half accountable or hold people halfway accountable. I'm fine doing this as a pilot. I very much do not want to find out after we've approved the budget and gone through the exercise that you guys went through last week to then find out this proposal comes in. I would really like to see it prior to that. I'm willing to give it a try. I don't think it's going to make or break the town, but I think we really want to think it through, because I do think it is part of being responsible. And these are the town's assets. And to tell some people that for whatever reason did not bring the book back, everybody else is going to fund your failure to return the book, doesn't seem fair. But I understand, and I don't want people to not come to the library. It is a huge asset, and it's a very, very positive thing. So that's my conflict.
Okay. Well, I think I'm hearing consensus in piloting the 1 year. I wanted to see if there was anything that anyone proposed amending the motion that was written in our packet to speak to the folks who I guess we would be looking back and granting amnesty to. I guess one option would be to do the pilot for a year and, assuming it's successful, have that conversation at that time. I'm wondering if folks would be supportive of that.
Are you saying grandfather people after?
So I don't know if we're ready at the moment to give blanket amnesty to the past fines. And I just wanted to be specific about what our intent is in the motion.
I mean, from my standpoint, if our goal, forget the fines, forget the accountability, is to incentivize usage and circulation at the library, then I think we do the amnesty. Because I think that's part of the message for these guys. It's clean and it's not, well, we're gonna change our mind
Yeah.
next year and now you gotta pay me. Because that's,
I-
then I think we've,
Yeah, I don't want to have to
I
go
don't even
back
want
I
to
to
do-
do
that.
that. Because
I
that's
do-
just a negative message.
I agree
Again,
with that.
I'm struggling personally with it, but you got me to change my mind, honestly, on the fact that it's all about usage, and it's all about getting people to have a positive experience, so I do appreciate that.
That's right. Okay. Would there be a motion effective March 25th, 2019, to authorize the Simsbury Public Library to pilot for 1 year, beginning July 1st, 2019, eliminating overdue fines except for museum passes, library of things items, and pronto books, and instead making available a library support jar with collected funds being deposited into the general fund?
Well, I'll move that.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Did you do the amnesty?
What?
Yeah,
What did we
so,
do with the
You didn't do the
amnesty?
amnesty.
Oh, well, I don't think we, I think we're giving,
You gotta,
Can't think
should
of
we
it.
make a form?
You could
I don't want any
or
ambiguity.
assume amnesty within it.
You could take a formal motion or consensus, but either for the record, I think would be sufficient if you just want to either, again, take a formal motion or do that by consensus.
Okay, so I think, so by consensus, we're okay with granting amnesty to people who have passed, are they fines or fees? I want to be specific.
Fines.
Fines, thank you.
Yes, I am.
Okay, there's no objection to that, then I think we're good. Thank you. So next, Lisa will,
Thank you,
I
Lisa.
I think you're,
Thank you. He's up again.
Lisa or Tom, with the story walk proposal? Okay.
All right, so our next presentation tonight is about the story walk. So what is a story walk? It's actually an innovative way for families to enjoy reading and the outdoors. It was created by a librarian in the state of Vermont. And story walks at this point are across the nation and they're actually throughout the world. And we actually think that Simsbury is the perfect place for this project. We're known for our hiking trails, we're known for our outdoor activities, we're known for our commitment to education. The planned installation for our proposed story walk would be spring of 2020, and it will actually be a seasonal installation with the story feature changing annually. So what would happen is the story walk would go out in the spring, and in the fall, the Parks and Rec staff would take them down, take the panels down. We would store them for the winter, and when they would go out in the spring with the help of Parks and Rec, the story will have changed. There are other story walks in Connecticut. There's one in North Haven, there's one in Westport. The Avon Library actually did a temporary story walk around their farmers market a few summers ago, but again, that was just temporary. And most of the story walks in Connecticut have been created as partnerships between libraries, other private not-for-profits, and town departments, just like ours would be. And they encourage families to get outdoors, to do fitness activities, to enjoy the outside, and also engage in an educational experience at the same time. So possible proposed locations for our story walk, we're going to walk you through them with some of the pros and cons. The first would be Iron Horse Boulevard on the trail. One of the pros about that is that it's located downtown. Its proximity to Rotary Park, where there are lots of families. There's adequate parking there at Rotary Park, and the panels could actually easily be installed on the existing structures of the fence that's already there. Schultz Park would be the next possible location. It's downtown, which is a pro. It's also a very beautiful landscaped area. One of the cons, though, there's no parking right there, so if you're a family, it would be very challenging. It also requires the story panels to be installed on posts, so there would be digging. And when we took them down, the posts would remain, I would assume. Oops, sorry. We weren't done. The next location would be the park at 1 Old Bridge Road. And obviously the pro to that, it is downtown, and there is some parking. It's a landscape scenic area. One of the cons is that it would definitely require permitting process due to the fact that it's it's located within the floodplain. The other downfall to the park at Old Bridge Road is that the story panels would have to be mounted on posts again, so the posts would have to come out or remain in for the winter.
That would be a 4-hour conservation meeting.
That's why it's a con.
That's a con, right. The next possible location might be the Terrafil Green. Positive to that, it's a beautiful landscaped area. It pulls Terrafil into Simsbury. There's very limited parking there, unfortunately, and again, we have the issue with the posts. And the final spot that it could be located is at the library. Obviously, the pro to that is that it's located downtown. Unfortunately, there are ADA accessibility issues if it's located at the library because of the terrain at the library. There is some parking, obviously. We would also have to install the posts at the library, so that's another con to that location.
Can I just quickly jump in? Sorry. The cons on Iron Horse Boulevard, our internal traffic authority group has been working with Tom and Lisa on this just to potentially identify, which site might be the most suitable. And the two challenges that we did have on Iron Horse Boulevard is if we were to install the posts on the other side of the path, then we potentially also run into issues with permitting and needing to go before the Conservation Commission. But one concern that the internal traffic authority internal traffic authority group did have with the posts on the fence is that it might cause some difficulty with the cycling community. Whereas if the posts were on the other side, families could sort of move over more easily if there were cyclists going back and forth. So those were sort of the two potential challenges that we had with that location.
With the post on as the picture is presented, with the post on the left too, for ADA accessibility, there also would be some construction with leveling and possibly graveling, paving, because you would have to get the accessibility around the post. Whereas if we mount it to the existing fence line, we're covered at that height and accessibility wise. There is a bicycle lane on Iron Horse Boulevard established already. When we were looking at that site, Lisa and I, we considered the possibility bicyclists would be impeded by people stopping along the path to do the story walk panels. However, somebody along the line did put the established bike path lane, the Cheryl lane, I believe, in along Iron Horse Road or Iron Horse Boulevard. So there is an option there.
But is it used?
Yeah. Well, no.
There could be additional signage at the start. There is no signage at the start of the road or at the end of the road, from what
Actually,
I've seen.
I think there is signage.
Yeah, 12 miles an hour.
But I think that's a significant issue.
That is
I mean,
an issue.
serious cyclists who are cycling a long way or exercising will use the road, but people who are out there with their family are not going to use the road, which is totally understandable. And as someone who uses the Greenway a lot, rollerblading, any gathering of people milling around in a lane is really a safety issue. And the other thing I worry about on the right side is someone sees someone coming and say, hey, Jimmy, get out of the way, and they accidentally kind of move towards the road. So I really think that whole issue of keeping it as much as possible on the inside is an important safety issue.
I think people will do the right thing, Chris.
What?
We're not their moral compass. They'll do the right thing.
I don't get the point, John.
They'll do the right thing.
Stop. I think that's a very serious safety issue there.
Yeah.
I mean, I ride my bike down there a lot. and
So if you go,
just going around strollers and dogs and
If you go
everything
inside-
else is an issue.
if you go inside debating this, if you go inside the park, then you go inside to the Rotary Placegate, right, and you're on the inside of that. Now that's at grade, correct? And you could attach it to the inside of the fence inside
fence.
that. So therefore, giving you access to the general location, but also be compliant, you don't have to do any grade change work.
Potentially, I mean, if
And
it
it's
was
story
mounted,
time, it's
mounted
kids,
flush to the fence, that's one thing. The way, as presented, with the panels on an angle, you couldn't do that inside the playground, because you'd have kids running around and somebody not paying attention, and they're gonna catch a corner.
Right.
Well, but then there's gotta be some sort of compromise. So it's not, on this location, it's vertically set on the fence or something. I don't know. I'm trying to help you guys here.
And, I mean, it's something that could be looked at, whether it could be flush mounted to the fencing down there now.
It's age appropriate to where the space is, most likely.
And I think there's two issues. No matter where you put it, we need it to be safe, but we need it ADA accessible. Initially I was thinking of putting it on the light poles, but then you need to have an area around them, plus the height issue. That becomes a problem. It's a challenge.
These are good problems to have, though, I think. Yeah. Go ahead.
So moving on to logistics, what you see here is one of the story panels actually mounted on a post. And you can see the 45-degree angle presentation, and it gives you the dimensions of the visual area. And all of the story placards are covered with a protective plexiglass sheet. And as I said, the library will be changing them out annually. Generally speaking, there will be 16 panels to complete the project, because most storybooks are 32 pages long, so you'd have 2 panels, 2 story pages on 1 panel.
It's amazing. I didn't even think about that. Did you know that? It's really.
Trick of the trade.
It's like you run a library. That's really cool.
So funding and timeline. The Friends of the Simsbury Public Library Investor Angels have actually generously already gifted up to $5,000 to fund the Story Walk panels. And the library is working with Parks and Recreation to have it be a seasonal installation so that the panels will have an extended life. And the library, of course, as I said, will be responsible for changing the story every year. And we really would like to have the Story Walk installed by the spring of 2020.
Totally, great idea.
And we're happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Good. Any other questions?
I mean, I assume the 5,000 covers it?
Yes.
Is that accurate? Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's some sort of every 5 year, every whatever year maintenance. I mean, poles rot, you gotta replace it, but that's.
It depends on how we mount them. If we mount them to an existing structure, then there won't be the poles to
Yeah.
replace. Yeah,
But we're talking about a nominal cost, so there really is no budgetary concerns here.
shouldn't be.
Makes sense.
And also, since we're taking it down seasonally, there'll be less wear and tear on the
Yeah,
panels.
no, that makes sense. I think this is great. My daughter will love this.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing.
Really is.
It is.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I love the fact that the library, like, is meeting people where they are. So I think that's a neat
Which is
concept.
another reason, a con to having it at the library.
Yeah, yeah, I was thinking
Yeah,
the same thing.
Yeah, on the road.
Okay.
I like this a lot.
Is there a motion effective March 25th, 2019, to accept the gift of up to $5,000 from the Investor Angels of the Friends of the Simsbury Public Library to fund the purchase of the Story Walk panels and to authorize the town manager and staff to determine the location of the placement of the Story Walk?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our thanks to the Friends. Next, we have a presentation from Betsy Guerra, Executive Director of COST, Council of Small Towns. She's going to review for us at a very high level several pieces of proposed state legislation that could be of impact to Simsbury. And my thought tonight is that it would be unlikely if we were to take a position on anything tonight, but if there were items that we either wanted more information on or possibly take a position on, we could ask staff to draft a resolution or a letter that we could consider at a future meeting. So, Betsy, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, Maria and Eric and the board for inviting me to present. Connecticut Council of Small Towns is a municipal advocacy organization. Our members have populations of 30,000 or less, and we have 110 members throughout Connecticut. The organization was established in 1975 to ensure that small towns had a strong voice at the state capitol on various issues affecting the state's smaller communities. So I'm happy to be here, and I did have a chance to drive through your beautiful, beautiful town of Simsbury. Some of the key issues, the first one on the list is House Bill 7150. This is one of the governor's recommendations, and it includes a provision that would actually shift 25% of the, what they call the normal cost, which is an actuarial term for the present value of the benefits going forward, to towns over a 3-year period. And, this bill has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle. There was a lot of talk at that hearing about the school consolidation proposals, and as a result, this got very little attention. And we are very concerned. It's probably one of the biggest issues that would have a negative impact on smaller towns throughout the state. In addition to spreading out 25% or requiring towns to pick up 25% of the cost, which, by the way, if you're looking at it in terms of a statewide impact, this is pushing $73 million onto the backs of property taxpayers. It also caps distressed municipalities at 5%, but it also requires towns that pay teacher salaries above the median to pick up an additional cost. So even though those additional salary costs would be reflected in the pension costs, they're again asking you to pick up more. So it's kind of a double whammy there. Education Committee has until April 1st to act on this bill, and so we will be issuing a legislative alert tomorrow. We've been talking to our members about it, talking to legislators, but again, it's something, because it's so less horrible than what was proposed a couple of years ago under the Governor Malloy's administration, which would have required towns to pick up a third of the unfunded pension liabilities, which was about 400 million statewide impact, that it's just not getting a lot of traction. So, but I look at the numbers that you have here for Simsbury, and by fiscal year 21-22, you're almost looking at $1 million. The other concern about this is that it's really just the foot in the door. There's nothing to stop them if they get the 25%, particularly given the state's ongoing budget challenges of then looking to increase that percentage over time, and then possibly even beginning to talk about the unfunded pension liabilities. At this point, towns have absolutely no say in setting the pension benefits or the contribution rate by teachers. It's all set in statute. And that's another issue we have, is that we have no control over these pension costs going forward. And it's just going to keep continuing to be a liability for the towns. Part of that proposal also accelerates changes to the education cost sharing formula, which has a huge impact on some of the towns. So instead of spreading out those increases, or actually the phase-in of those increases over 10 years, it now requires towns to pick up those additional costs. Well, they're going to end up seeing a reduction in ECS funding for the next fiscal year and beyond. So that is a problem, the way that it's drafted. We are trying to get some more attention on that, but again, it does seem to be getting lost in the shuffle. As I mentioned, the reason why there was 3 different proposals on school consolidation, redistricting. 2 of those are dead. The one that's listed here, 738, which was probably the most onerous because it would have required towns to, with populations under 40,000, to join a new or existing regional school district along probate district lines. It made absolutely no sense. Another bill would have required that school districts share superintendents if they serve a population of less than 2,000 students. Again, it was problematic. There's a lot of different reasons why school districts with less than 2,000 have a separate superintendent. Some share. Sometimes it's because of the way that their regional school district was formed back in the 1950s. So a lot of issues there, and we were concerned that it would penalize smaller school districts and existing regional school districts. What's happened now, the governor had also proposed a bill. Cost came out very strongly against that bill. It was created the Commission on Shared School Services, but instead of being something that would facilitate the voluntary sharing of services between towns and other towns, between towns and boards of education or other entities, it actually called for a plan for the school redistricting and school consolidation. And it appeared to be a foregone conclusion that the plan was going to come up with a way to promote redistricting of the schools. And that was very problematic for us. We heard from thousands and thousands of residents from small towns that that was just a non-starter. And unfortunately, things got pretty ugly during the debate. And instead of being a bill about trying to improve school efficiencies and reduce education spending, it ended up being about how do we address the need for greater diversity. But, you know, there was nothing in there to really look at that. So at this point, again, the Education Committee's deadline is April 1st. The governor has heard our concerns. Costs actually met with the governor's staff. They released a revised bill, which ends up calling for a study of voluntary efforts to share services. So it was much better. We're happy about that. Now we're finding out that that school superintendent piece is still going to be in there. There's also changes to school construction, so we need to look at that when that's available. Minimum wage, there are 3 different minimum wage bills, and they are on the fast track to approval. They were all approved by the Labor Committee in a 9-5 party line vote. All of these would increase the minimum wage to $15 per hour. We're hearing from a lot of towns that this would have a terrible impact on their park and rec programs, after-school programs, lifeguards, anyone really, these entry-level positions, and it's going to be difficult for them to be able to justify those continued expenses. They're either going to have to increase program fees, which would end up putting a burden on families, or they're just going to have to cut back on the program. So there had been some discussion as to whether could be an effort to expand the definition of seasonal employee, expand the definition of training wage. I'm told that that's not going to happen, that the only thing that they're considering is whether or not to phase in the increase over 3 years or over 4 years. So that's one that I think would have a big impact on municipalities. Paid family and medical.
I'm just going to quickly jump in right there. The Parks and Rec team did an analysis for me just to demonstrate the impact of that increase. And if the $15 minimum wage increase was implemented over the 3-year period, in aggregate over the 3 fiscal years, that would add just under $225,000 to our budget. And again, that revenue fund is already very challenged. So imagine a minimum wage increase, $225,000 over 3 years, added to that and the added pressure to that budget. So that's a real cost for our department.
The paid family and medical leave bills, there's also 3 of those bills, also came out of the Labor Committee on party line votes. The municipalities are actually not subject to the bill unless the collective bargaining units agree to opt in, so that can be collectively bargained. The issue there is then it's easier to qualify for a leave under the bill than it is under federal law. It's also, it may be that people will be able to take leave for a variety of reasons that aren't considered currently under the federal law. And so, we're keeping an eye on that. The fiscal note with that indicates that for the first year, there'll be a modest impact on municipalities, but then in the outlying years, there won't be. And I think that's a concern. So I think we're going to try to figure out what the impact would be and to provide that information to the Office of Fiscal Analysis. I know you have another speaker on the pilot program on the open space initiative, so I'll let Amy talk about that. Bears, so this is an issue up at the Capitol, and I apologize, I have the incorrect bill number there. It should be Senate Bill 586. So what started out as being a lottery in Litchfield County for the hunting of bears turned into, during the committee meeting, an act concerning the control of nuisance wildlife. So basically what it does is allow DEEP to issue permits to farmers and others to kill wildlife that are causing damage to either, currently it's agricultural crops, what they're doing is adding in poultry, bees, and livestock, because that is a big problem up in Litchfield County. It also does specify that that would include bears. And then the farmer, if they don't hunt, they can assign that permit to someone who does. It got out of the Environment Committee in a 17-11 vote. It was kind of mixed party line. And it's going to have a rough road going forward just because it's involving hunting, and those are always kind of tense issues up at the state capitol. The other companion piece is the Senate Bill 894, which talks about non-lethal management of bears, and it requires the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to do a study of ways that they can use non-lethal efforts to control that. And that's things that you've taught, one speaker already talked about, is making sure that you're tying up your garbage and making sure that municipal waste is not stashed someplace where there might be attractive to bears, using non-lethal techniques such as making noise, scaring them away. I didn't see anything in the bill that kind of included anything I hadn't heard about before, so I don't know what's going to happen with that. It's a study, but it's kind of calling for things that we already know are effective in deterring bears. So property tax reform, another very bad bill, Senate Bill 431. This was proposed by the Senate President Pro Tem, and so we take it very seriously, even though it's probably one of the worst bills that I've ever seen in terms of the impact on municipalities. It would establish a statewide mill rate on real property with an adjustment for the homestead tax exemption. It would repeal the car tax, replace it with a statewide car tax, and instead of the town collecting the revenues, that the town would, if they are allowed to collect the revenues, would have to send those to the state. It's more likely the state would actually collect the revenues, and then they would be divvied up back to the towns, but you wouldn't get the amount that you collected from your town. Shocker, I know. They would actually base it on different scenarios. So if you're a non-Alliance, or rather Alliance school district, which is some of the poorer school districts, if you have a significant percentage of pilot property, payment in lieu of taxes property. They have a tiered reimbursement for that now that favors cities as opposed to small towns, unless a couple exceptions there, like Mansfield. So we wouldn't see that money, and it would decimate local budgets because we count on that revenue. And everyone agrees, the car tax is inherently unfair, because why should I pay more tax in one town and much less tax in another town? But unfortunately, we do rely on that revenue, and it's a significant amount of revenue. And so, because we have no other means of raising revenue, we are opposing that. It is a proposed bill. It has not been fully fleshed out, which means it doesn't really make a lot of sense at this point. But the Finance Committee will be acting on that, and they have a longer window, and that goes till the end of, it's either last day of April or May 1st. I have to look at that. So again, there's a lot out there. It's important to pay attention because these things are going to be happening pretty quickly.
So it sounds like of the ones that you mentioned, the minimum wage increase sounds like the most likely to gain traction.
I think that definitely has a lot of traction. It was proposed by the governor. It has wide support in the Progressive Caucus and in the Senate Dems Caucus. And so just looking at the numbers, yeah, I think it has a very real chance of passage this session.
I have a question about the Commission on Shared Services for the schools. I read some of the background material on that, and I know they've already identified the membership of that commission, but it seems like the amount of information that they're going to be requesting from the school districts is extremely onerous. And it looked to me like another unfunded mandate. I mean, the amount of data and information that the schools are going to be required to produce to satisfy this commission for uncertain results seemed another wasteful unfunded mandate.
I would agree with that. I think a lot of the data is available. The State Department of Ed has kinds of data. The regional education service centers collect data. The school districts themselves were, in fact, Representative Hampton's aides made data that they had on shared services in Simsbury. So the data is out there. I think we were so relieved
forms, and you were going to have to fill out
after so many
forms.
Conversations where we said, this is not a voluntary shared services bill. They kept insisting that it was, and we said, read it together, line 3, it calls for a plan for redistricting. So I think we were so relieved that they moved away from that we haven't focused on kind of the other details and where that is now. And I think the Education Committee definitely understands these concerns, but I do think.
But they usually ignore them. So the number of unfunded mandates that we're already subject to costs us a tremendous amount of time and money. And to add this on top of that
You're right. I mean,
It's
it's
just unacceptable.
unnecessary because you're basically asking for information that is already available.
It's already
somewhere
there,
else.
and they're creating these forms and things they're gonna have to fill out and send back within certain timeframes,
And the other thing is they actually requested, I think it was either 2 or 3 full-time people in the State Department of Education to look at this data.
Of course,
yeah,
they need.
and they've already set aside, almost $1 million?
Yeah.
Just for the commission to
Right.
look, I mean, without even accounting for what the towns are gonna have to pay to
Yes.
produce it.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so much of our administrative costs are tied up in those unfunded mandates of reporting already, and they want us to share
crazy.
services, they want us to share superintendents. Half the time, we're employing these people to meet the data
To meet
requirements
their
of the state.
requirements,
I mean, and not, let alone, they need to educate the kids too, and that's almost become their side job because of all the reporting requirements.
You're right.
It's troubling. Quick question on House Bill 6749, housing. Is that the affordable housing redo?
It is, and
Okay.
part of it just reorganizes the statutes. We have had some legal counsel look at it to make sure that's all it does. But the other piece of that is that it allows the Office of Policy and Management to withhold discretionary state funding if you fail to meet certain goals. Now, that discretionary state funding could be Clean Water Fund, it could be State Revolving Fund Drinking Water, it could be Small Town Economic Assistance Program funding, which we're trying to get reinstated, by the way.
Yep.
So it did get approved by the Planning and Development Committee today. It does provide some additional language so that it's up to the discretion of OPM as to whether or not they will withhold the funds. I'm still uncomfortable with that, so they just acted on it earlier, so I'm looking at the language now. I'd be happy to share that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, because, that's always something that we've paid attention to, given, the mandate of affordable housing, which is important, but the way it's calculated is also challenging.
Right,
As
it's
you know,
very
it's-
rigid, yeah.
It is, and it doesn't take a lot of other affordable housing into account. It's somewhat archaic. Thank you.
Is there any chance that the stormwater bill is going to get any traction? 'Cause-
Actually, it was approved by the Environment Committee today. COSTEC had
Excellent.
put that bill in there. And it is, because if you go back to the original, I don't know if it was the original, but the last general permit on the stormwater management, DEEP really started failing to do their job. They weren't providing the guidance, they weren't updating the guidance documents or any of the management tools. They're doing it now, but we want to make sure that they continue to do that and look for ways to mitigate some of the costs, because towns are struggling with
It's-
that.
Yeah, it's a great burden.
Even though we were able to try to rein it in a bit, there's still a lot, and they're in year 2 now of the general permit, and
Going back to the bear hunting initiative, I heard I respect and heard the perspective that you offered, that regardless of the conditions, it's a flashpoint topic because of the concept of hunting. Putting that aside, if it had not been I'll use the term encumbered, and anybody can yell at me, fine, but if it had been encumbered by the additional conversations that took place to add in the nuisance components and all that, if it had stayed as it was initially proposed and was just about bears, did you sense that there was traction to move the conversation forward successfully, even though there is still that emotional component around hunting to it?
no, I don't believe there was, and I think that's why Senator Craig Minor, who's from Litchfield County and ranking member on environment, ended up moving it in this direction. I'm not Cost did not take a position
No,
on
but
the bear
you were there.
bill, so
I'm
not as
asking for
close to
your-
it as some of the other issues.
the tenor of
But
what
I
you
am
heard.
going to flag it. We have our board meeting on the 28th and see whether or not they want to weigh in. It's certainly an issue in our small towns. We see it everywhere, and it's, this focus is now on the farmers and how they can control it, but people are worried about their kids and
Yeah.
And just to be clear, the representative out of Hartford wants to reintroduce timber wolves as the solution? I read that correctly?
I read that too.
Okay.
Oh, Lord.
I'll be
Yeah,
dealing
make it
with
up.
them.
In Hartford.
I mean, it's not, I'm not.
Bushnell
making-
Park? I mean, yeah.
Not making light of it, but these are, certainly safety is our primary concern, but there is a considerable cost to this.
Yeah.
That this town is, every other small town is gonna be facing due to this challenge, so it's not something we should just, it's a very difficult decision, but so isn't policemen and plows.
Right.
Yeah, it is, and I don't want thoughts and prayers if something happens to somebody's kid in one of these towns because they failed to act, I mean, they have the opportunity to potentially mitigate this, so. Again, I'm not for shooting wild animals, but, again, if you've got to choose between people's kids and bears in the backyard, it's a pretty easy decision for me.
Agreed. And if you look at what other states around us are doing, they have some kind of a bear hunting lottery.
Yeah. All right. So
Thank
lots
you.
of good news out of the Capitol.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
changed.
yeah. Any other questions for Betsy?
Thank you for your advocacy. and
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks
a lot,
That's
Betsy.
helpful.
Taking care of
Thanks
us.
for having me.
That's really
Appreciate it.
helpful.
Good to see you.
And another piece of proposed legislation we expressed interest in learning more about a few meetings ago was HB 5254, which would create a fund for the stewardship and acquisition of open space by taxing many property sales over a certain level. So I'll introduce Amy Patterson. Thanks for being here tonight.
Sure, no problem. Thanks. For the record, I'm Amy Patterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, which is the statewide umbrella organization for the land conservation community, working most particularly with the state's 137 or so land trusts, including yours here in Simsbury. HB 5254 actually did not make it out of the Environment Committee today. So technically, as far as that committee goes, unless they surprise us and go against what they said today, and schedule another meeting this week, they have till technically the 29th to raise their bills and vote on them, but they stated that they would not have another meeting. So 5254 is effectively dead. However, the concept still lives. And what we were told by, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions, but I wanted to just start off by giving you that update. So what we were told by a couple of the members of the Environment Committee was that if the members of the Planning and Development Committee indicated that they would be in favor of this concept, again, it would be a different bill. There's a chance that the language could be tacked onto another bill. So because this has been a multi-year effort, even though this particular bill is now dead, we continue to talk about it, and I welcome the opportunity to answer questions from any municipality that has questions with respect to this, because it likely will come back again next year, as it has for years past. So that said, this in concept now is enabling legislation, meaning it's not a requirement on towns. It would give towns the option to establish a buyer's conveyance fee on real property. The way it is drafted now, it's up to 1%, and there would be an exemption of a minimum of $150,000 of the purchase price. It was broadly written so that towns could decide whether or not they wanted to impose this on just residential real property, or if they wanted to expand it to other real property as well. The way it is also written, it is, although if you read the bill, it looks as if any town would have the option right through the session until it's adopted to get into the bill. And they did that purposely because towns continue to express interest in joining this pilot program. So when we started off, there were maybe, last year we had 4 towns that were interested, that grew into 10 towns. This year we started off with 15 towns that expressed an interest in doing that, and their municipal CEOs submitted letters asking to be included in the bill. And that's where it stands, or it stood, right until today. And so clearly, if towns are interested in this, has a chance of moving forward in some other vehicle, again, it would be asking to be included. So it's purely voluntary, and it's only for those towns that ask to be in the bill, not statewide in its application.
It's interesting that it didn't get, sent out of committee, given that it's a voluntary.
It was interesting
bill.
for me to listen to Betsy talk about, these bills that really are unfunded mandates. And it's so ironic to me that one that is optional to give towns the opportunity to raise some funds in a more creative and alternative way is being rejected outright. It's voluntary, it's optional, it's flexible. I mean, there really is no risk in doing this, and mostly because by just enabling it, it's not even telling you you do or don't have to do it. That would be up to this town in your legislative process to decide at the local level whether you wanted to adopt it. But you don't have that power right now to have that conversation. You have to be given that through this legislation. So yeah, it's unfortunate. There's been opposition to this, significant opposition to this through the realtors' lobbies. And so realtors and home builders lobbies, and many of the concerns, if not all of the concerns that have been raised, are contrary to the evidence that's been accumulated through the experiences in other states. It's been very positive experience in other states. So that's where it is right now, and I would love to answer your questions about this, because again, if it happens to move forward this session and this town is interested in being included, then you'll have the information to make that decision here. And if it doesn't move forward this session, it will likely come back next year, and we would return to those towns that have expressed an interest to see if you'd be interested in participating.
Thank you. Can I just share with you a little bit about why I'm struggling with this, and
Sure.
maybe
Yeah, absolutely.
you can respond.
Absolutely.
So on the one hand, I don't think we need more taxes. On the other hand, I am appreciative of opportunities to diversify the types of taxes, to take some pressure theoretically off the property tax, so that I see that as a positive. I also think, and we had this conversation with the Open Space Committee, there is support for the idea that we need a reliable source of money, especially to fund the stewardship of open space. So in Simsbury, we've acquired a lot of open space, but how do we maintain it?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, and this discussion of, more taxes or fees, whatever you want to call it, that is just a very common discussion that we're having. And, the response to that really is, especially when it comes to stewardship, it's not a choice. I mean, if you have lands in your town and you need to maintain them, that's not a choice. And so you have to find money to pay for them somehow. And so right now, the option is, and correct me if I'm wrong with this particular town, is putting it in as a line item in your budget, which could impact your mill rate, or if it's a specific project, is going to bond. So in that regard, it's going to be an expense, it's a tax anyway. So the idea behind this is that it's a user fee. Basically, it's imposing a one-time fee on those that have chosen to move to Simsbury because of the amenities that it offers, particularly its open space, parks, and other natural resources. And so those are amenities that someone chooses to, again, they're attractive to somebody, they choose the town for that reason, but they are immediately enjoying the benefits of that right off the bat without having to pay anything. While people who are living here for years have been paying through their real property taxes to create those conditions that are attracting people to the town. So that is, it's a user fee in that regard, and it's paid once. And then when those individuals move to the town, they've paid their fee, they're enjoying these resources, arguably, they're not going to have to see an increase in their real property taxes because this fund is being created through another way.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any data, and of the states that have allowed this, let's say allowed this, like a negative connotation, but of the states that have implemented the option for towns to do this, is there any sort of data, or is it too new, whereby that the funding is adequate to meet the go-forward needs of the open space stewardship? Because I could see potentially somebody saying to me, 20 years down the road, we ask for money in the budget to support something that somebody would come back and say, I can't support that because I've been paying into this fee, or I paid into this fee that you guys enacted years ago, and I thought that was supposed to take care of the challenges of.
Yeah, no, I think
So
it's
are we
it's a
far enough
very
down
good
the road
question.
where?
Yeah, and I think that really varies from town to town, depending upon how they want to use it. But I will tell you that there are studies out there, there are case studies as well as empirical data that's out there saying that these programs have been successful in every state that has implemented them. And it's 13 states across the country have done it, enabling for municipalities, and I think the difference up to 37 have done it statewide. And in every case, when there's been an opportunity to, if there's been a sunset and there's been an opportunity then to reenact the legislation at the local level, it has always been reenacted, and they've raised fees. They've had very good success with the program. Yeah. And what's also interesting is the realtors in those particular case studies that had been presented that were initially opposed to it really became fans of the program, because what they were finding is that towns that had this, where they were taking care of the land through stewardship or they were purchasing open space, what they found was it was enhancing real property values in the town. And so the initial concerns that were expressed by realtors were actually negated by what was actually happening on the ground. So they have been successful, and there are studies, and I'm happy to send you that information. Very happy to do that.
No, I think that should be part of it. I mean, that should be part of the consideration, just as we become informed, is that question.
I'm happy to do that. We
I
have a link
respect the
on our,
realtors. I can see a realtor's positioning, but I think that many people who choose, it's an interesting conversation. There's many people who choose to come to Simsbury because of these very reasons that we're trying to protect. This is a way that you can buy in and assure that continues going forward in the future. The reason why you came here in the first, one of the reasons why you came here in the first place.
Yeah, and I think, it's a very easy conversation for me to have with towns, because if you all looked at me and shook your head no, I would say then that's fine, because you don't need to participate in this. You don't need to ask to be in this legislation, but if, for those towns, the 15 towns that really want this, they've all asked for it. There's municipal CEOs, like I said, they've written letters to their legislators asking for it. It seems, it's very frustrating to not give those towns the opportunity to have this conversation with their residents.
Yeah.
So that's where it stands. But I'm happy to, I have links, we have a lot of information on our website, so Maria, I'll just send you the link. And there's a couple of studies on there. There's one that was done for Texas that's really enlightening with particular data that way. Thank you. Yep.
Great, thanks for being here tonight.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thanks for
Thanks for
your time.
having me.
I'm sorry, do you have any studies that are sort of tailored to, towns our size, towns are?
So there are.
Because I'm a little concerned about the buy-in time. It's going to take some time to build up enough funds to make a difference in our budget. And I'm wondering how long that takes for towns that, of our size.
Yeah, and
I
think that that's something that some of the towns that testified at the hearing brought their own real estate data, and they did their own calculations, and they were able to see that if we implemented it this year based upon real property sales at 0.5%, because it's up to 1%, 0.5%, this is how much money we would gain. So that really is something that internally you could figure out.
And I think that would be helpful for the public to understand, this is why we're doing this, because over a period of time, we're gonna have enough money to support our open
Right,
space.
and again, I think that's something that internally you could do, crunching your own numbers, but looking at these studies, they do have some charts about, how much has
Yeah,
come
that's a
in.
good point. Okay.
Yeah.
I would just propose, the essence of what this is saying is that when you invest in stewardship of open space and purchasing open space, it is more than a return to the value to the homeowner. But what I would just throw out here, I'm inspired to say, because we're in the middle of the budget process, is we have shied away from a community of really overtly having that conversation within the operating budget, let alone within the mechanism of you can call it a user fee or a
Right.
tax.
Yeah.
And that is, we need to remind ourselves that people pay more money to live in Simsbury than other communities, and we have to invest in the infrastructure and the product to reward that and to further that more. So personally, I'm an advocate that we should be, always have been discussing, what do we need to put in our operating budget to provide stewardship as well as to continue to purchase any property that we can, so.
Yeah, no argument from me, absolutely agreed. I mean, I think that, when we think of land conservation, many people think about the acquisition and then they stop there. But stewardship moving forward is as big a part, if not more, of protecting land in perpetuity.
Facing it now.
Yeah,
Agreed.
yeah,
It's a lot less sexy, but it's a lot more practical.
absolutely. It's harder to raise money around it,
Yes.
yeah, so.
Any other questions? Great, thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Really
Thanks for
appreciate you being
inviting me,
here.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.
So I think, a lot of this is a moving target. I was originally going to advocate that we take a position against the school consolidation bills, but those appear to be not going anywhere. And I was also going to advocate an expansion of the Litchfield bear hunting bill to include either Hartford County or the entire state. And again, that's now off the table. So I didn't know if there were other items that we would want to bring back to a future meeting from an advocacy perspective.
Maybe what we can do, Eric, is wait and see. We've got the rest of this week for most of the committees to come out with the bills that are going to come out. And we don't know what they're going to come out with, and then we can kind of take a position on what does or doesn't come out, but also make a judgment as to what we think is going to come back, because some of these bills, even the ones that did not come out of committee, can come back in some other form.
I mean, the problem with all of these bills is, as we've seen, the president of the Senate got his bill a couple of years ago for changing the car tax, and then that fell flat. They come out one year, they don't get it the first year, they often do get it the second year in some form, so this isn't a one-year challenge from what we've seen in past practice. And the other problem is they do it at midnight on the last night of session with no fiscal notes and with very little actual disclosure and reading of the bills.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can come out against all the bills, but it's more broadly of stop passing unfunded mandates that don't make sense. Find a way to diversify the tax base that doesn't place undue burdens upon our residents. And, stop telling us you know better how to run the town than we do. It's basically how I see it from a boiled down standpoint. But also, there needs to be real solutions. As much as I want to say no to all this stuff, I haven't seen an actual solution that's been proposed that solves a lot of these problems, because we do have an underfunded pension problem. We do have, a tax diversity problem that we can't just bury our heads in the sand and say no to everything either. There needs to be proactive solutions out there. So I agree with you that we need to say something, but I'm not sure commenting on individual bills accomplish anything from our standpoint.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to agree with Mike. I think maybe if we wait and see what comes out of committee, particularly on these education bills, because the impact could be huge, that we reconsider, commenting on that once we know the particular ones that are going forward.
Right.
We've got a lot at stake here.
And to that point, I think we have a huge amount at stake, and frankly, one of my major frustrations is that I have yet to hear the state talking about any cuts to any spending. They've only talked about increasing taxes. And I'm sorry, as we're going to get to shortly, we're going to be talking about our spending and our cuts. And I do think that it is not good leadership to only talk about raising taxes. They should be also talking about cutting spending.
Agreed.
So, I'll get off my soapbox.
No.
I'm going to add my soapbox to Sean, but, sometimes, sometimes we're looking for creative solutions, and sometimes you can't always just say no, we're looking for creative solutions. But sometimes, unfortunately, we just have to make some very difficult decisions too. And that's, we're facing that. The Board of Finance the other night, some people had very valid perspectives about with their lines that couldn't be crossed and stuff. But maybe there's just isn't another decision to be made other than making a very painful decision too. And I think we're going to be facing that shortly with our own budget here.
And if I could,
Maria?
Eric, just to that point, one proposal I have been following closely is the teacher's retirement system assessment. And I think, right, the concern, as Betsy indicated, is that we're just going to continue to get a bill, but with no voice in the governance structure and no voice in negotiating the benefits and no changes to binding arbitration. And so, perhaps that's an area ultimately at your future meeting, if you want to take a position on something where we could offer some alternatives and some solutions to say, well, that's fine if you want to proceed with this, but have you given thought to giving local governments a voice at the negotiating table on this issue, a voice in the governance structure, and making some meaningful changes to the binding arbitration laws that we have to work with within our local government context and constraints. So that's one area in particular where, again, perhaps we have a voice and can say, here are some possible solutions.
And Chris is going to roll his eyes, but I'm going to bring it up like I do every year. Eventually, we're going to say no to the state. So how do we do that? I would love to know if we told the state to go pound sand, because we don't get any more money from them, how much money would we save? And go ahead and let them bring us to
we
court.
lose $6 million.
If they take away the car tax, do we care? I mean, it all depends on what they take away and the misguided decisions that they make, because, they've led us on this path for a long time. So at some point, standing up and saying, no, you can't give us that bill might be the answer as well. So we'll see.
You okay with that, Chris?
I wasn't listening. I'm sorry.
So I get to just lob the Chris down the other end of the table and see which one he rolls her eyes
See
at.
which one responds. Chris put his earbuds in, he's not listening.
Are you taking that bait, Chris?
Take back that offer of the beer I was going to get you.
I move that we cut Chris's salary for 2019.
Is it okay if I move on? All right, cool. Thank you
Please, God,
for the
do.
conversation. I'll be brief with the first Selectmen's report. On March 19th, the Board of Selectmen presented its adopted budget to the Board of Finance. Thank you, Sean. The budget, as it currently stands, maintains town services at their current level and contains very few what we would consider service enhancements. Healthcare costs and debt service have proven to be significant budget drivers. We're working hard to balance those obligations, the high expectations of our residents for services, and a desire to keep increases in the mill rate in check. You can find all of the budget materials there's a link right on the front page of our website. There's also a hyperlink in the report we're sending out tomorrow. We've got the full budget document as well as a PowerPoint summary. On Tuesday, April 2nd, the Board of Finance will be holding a public hearing on the budget. The referendum at Henry James Middle School is scheduled for Tuesday, May 14th. As always, I welcome your comments and your feedback through this process. You can find my email and all of our emails through the Board of Selectmen website. I'm excited to share that Congress has designated the Lower Farmington River, which includes a portion in Simsbury, a wild and scenic river. The wild and scenic designation was created by Congress in 1968 to ensure that certain rivers remain in a free-flowing condition, while also recognizing their appropriate use and development. This designation would not have been possible without a decade-plus of work by the Lower Farmington River and Salmon Brook Wild and Scenic Study Commission. The next step is to form an advisory committee to create strategies that bring communities together in protecting, enhancing, and managing local river resources. The town of Simsbury, American Legion Post 84, and Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 1926 are organizing 2 Memorial Day parades on May 27th. Terriffill Parade will march along Winthrop Street, starting at 9 a.m., followed by a ceremony at St. Bernard Cemetery. And the Simsbury Parade will start at 1:30 in its usual location. The theme this year is the 75th anniversary of D-Day. We'll be recognizing our World War II veterans, and the Scouts will be telling stories of 5 of Simsbury's World War II veterans who died in service. And that's my first Selectmen's report.
Great.
Maria?
Thank you, Eric. Under Board of Selectmen business for the fiscal 1920 budget, again, the public hearing on April 2nd at 6 p.m. I do just want to bring to your attention, we're going to try a new location this year, program room 1 of the Simsbury Public Library. We have some good technology available to us there, and from a staff perspective, last year we did have some challenges with town staff being able to access the various needed documents because of the school IT infrastructure. So we thought we would give it a try. Program room 1 of the library, it's easy to find, it does have good parking, and if we find that as a location it doesn't work well, we can always go back to the old location, but did just want to bring to your attention to not forget the new location this year. We are going to be advertising in the newspaper for the public hearing through social media. We're also going to be posting notices on A-frame or sandwich boards through a number of locations throughout town to try and help spread the word about that hearing. Regarding the sustainability team agenda item, at their meeting on March 21st, the Culture, Parks and Recreation Commission endorsed the appointment of Sarah Kramer to the sustainability team. That information was not available at the time that the packet was distributed. So I would just ask this evening if her name could be added to the motion for consideration on the sustainability team appointments. Departmental news and notes from engineering. Aquarian Water Company will be upgrading the existing water main. That's primarily along Firetown Road. That will be occurring later this spring and throughout the summer. During that construction, there will be temporary alternating one-way traffic. At the end of each workday, the road will be reopened to two-way traffic. Some temporary water outages are expected to be less than an hour as they're working on the water line. Aquarian has been working to notify residents in that neighborhood that would be affected. And information can be found at aquarian.com/CT.
Did we just pave that, or did we pave the other half?
Other portion, and we were looking at potentially some opportunities to pave the section that they'll be
I
working
knew
on.
we paved part of Firetown, sorry.
Yep, that's okay. That's a great question. We do typically, we'll take a look when we have the opportunity at either deeded sewer work or water line work as an opportunity to potentially do paving work because it does ultimately reduce some of the paving costs.
Awesome, thank you.
Excuse me, police. We have a number of personnel-related announcements. PFC Lauren Devon, who was our community service officer for about 5 years, was recently reassigned to the detective division. And that was again effective February. Want to wish her well on her new assignment. PFC JP Lassard was then assigned to the community services officer position. He's been with us for about 6 years, and again, want to extend him well wishes in his new position. And we have a new hire, Connor Arnold. He is going to be going to the academy. He was hired to fill a current vacancy that we have within the department. He has served with the Air Force Reserve, and he's pursuing an associate's degree in aerospace maintenance technologies. We are going to be having a swearing-in ceremony for him April 2nd at 2:30 p.m. here at Town Hall, and welcome anyone to attend who would like to join us for that. And an announcement from the town manager's office. We are now accepting nominations for our 2019 Hometown Heroes program. Those nominations, we can receive them in writing, either in person. If you want to drop them off, we'll accept them through the mail. And this will be our second year of folks being able to submit nomination forms online. We will be accepting those nomination forms through April 22nd at 9 a.m. And again, this is an opportunity to nominate a Simsbury resident or somebody who's been active in the Simsbury community for really just going above and beyond for our community, demonstrating selfless, efforts to really better our town and our community. So again, I would encourage folks to submit their nomination forms. And the annual Hometown Hero ceremony will be held on Wednesday, May 29th this year at 4:30 p.m. at Eno. For special events and programs, just a reminder that the first Veterans Coffee Hour will be occurring on April 1st from 10 to 11 at Eno. And the Aging and Disability Commission, in conjunction with our Community and Social Services Department, are co-sponsoring the first annual Sensory Friendly Spring Fling. That will be held on Wednesday, April 3rd, from 4 to 6 p.m. at Eno. And we, again, encourage folks to attend. We'll be having a shred event on Saturday, April 6th. That is being sponsored by the Simsbury Police Department and Community and Social Services. That will be from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. here at the Simsbury Town Hall parking lot. It's open to Simsbury residents. It's free. We do request that folks have a 3-bag maximum when they come with their items to be shredded. And if there are any questions, folks can contact PFC Lassard.
This is grocery size.
Grocery size.
Oh,
Yes, small bags.
I got some big bags.
And lastly, we do have a household hazardous waste collection coming up next month, Saturday, April 27th. That will be at the Farmington High School from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Again, that's a regional initiative that's open to residents from Simsbury, Avon, Canton, Farmington, and Granby. In addition to the household hazardous waste items, residents can drop off electronics, used motor oil, and personal documents for shredding up to 2 boxes at no cost.
Or they get a box, right?
And that concludes my report this evening.
Great, thank you, Maria. We'll move on to Selectman action, and the first item is the discussion of the budget. At the last Tuesday's Board of Finance meeting, again, thank you, Sean, for leading the presentation to the Board of Finance. They asked us to come back and look at several items. One, determine any further capital or operating reductions, develop a prioritized list of capital and CNR projects, and consider bonding for the more than $600,000 in paving costs currently paid for in cash. What I've asked Maria and Amy to do is put together some scenarios in a spreadsheet so that we could have that discussion in a structured fashion and react to it and understand what various decisions would do, not just to the mill rate, but really look at what does it mean for the median homeowner in terms of a tax increase, so we understand what impact our decisions will have tonight. I also wanted to share a few items that came to light this week. 2 of them are good news. The first is a revision upward of our grand list growth. Maria, would you mind giving an update on that?
Sure. So we have a revised projection on our grand list growth. We projected an increase of 0.85%. It's now revised at 0.92%. That will generate about $60,000 in additional revenue for us. So we do have some good news to report on that.
Yeah, and the other is a revision downward of healthcare costs, thanks to some favorable results in February.
Yeah, absolutely. So as this is an evolving issue, we've been trying to take a look at claims at the end of every month. We did receive our claims data from the end of February. That claims data was slightly more favorable than we were expecting. Based on that data, we could take what was the 14.88% increase scenario, and we believe we could adjust downward if we were to use that scenario, adjust downward to a 12% increase. So it's still a very large increase, but it does provide a bit of relief. For the town, that would be about an $86,000 in savings. But if you'll recall, with that particular scenario, we did recommend an additional contribution to shore up the reserve a bit. And that could come from any number of sources, such as year-end excess revenues or transfer from fund balance or some other means.
Okay. I think the last item I wanted to highlight before we look at the spreadsheet is the $1.5 million that was originally set aside because of a loss of the Hartford. We have confirmed this week that that money has not been spent. So one thing that this board could do is recommend to the Board of Finance that some items that we're budgeting for tonight could be paid for with those dollars, thus mitigating further mill rate increases. Anything, Sean or Maria, you would add to that?
Well, I just think in regards to the 1.5 million, in addition to, potentially, I wouldn't necessarily recommend use of that 1.5 million for ongoing operating expenses. That just sort of creates a cliff or a hole for years moving forward. But if we did want to potentially use some of that money to pay for capital projects that maybe we were going to pay for in cash, such as the paving, the $605,000 in paving, that would provide some mill rate relief now in the upcoming 1920 budget. Whereas some other possibilities, such as maybe making a contribution into a health insurance reserve, or maybe taking a smaller capital project that we were proposing to pay for with bonds, such as the underground storage tank project, which was about $325,000, maybe using some of that money for something like that. Using those funds for, say, the underground storage tank proposal or the health insurance reserve, again, are going to help us with our long-term financial health. So again, it's helping to take care of some of those long-term financial needs. Doesn't necessarily provide mill rate relief now, but again, is going to provide mill rate relief in the future by shoring up some of those long-term financial decisions.
Thank you.
I mean, the only thing I would say, Eric, just is we need to be careful with the recommendations, because after 3 hours and 45 minutes the other night, it was very clear the Board of Finance isn't necessarily interested in our recommendations overall. Obviously they're fixated on the mill rate, and rightfully so. They were, despite the fact that it took so long to go through our line items, I think there's consensus there that there's really not much, if anything, to cut. I mean, I know we're going to talk about some token items, but from you guys that were there too, I mean, we made it pretty clear that we're talking about $60,000 of service improvements here. So technically we could give you 60, but we're, these other things are fixed costs, and they're different assumptions than what they all had in their head in November. So, I mean, that seemed to resonate with them, but it was frustrating them, obviously, because they've got to look at, so the mill rate was potentially going up anywhere from 3.5 to 4.5, depending on, the scenarios. So I agree with you. I think we need to be creative, but I would really look for maybe us to give a little bit more guidance to Maria and Amy on what they think they should present to the Board of Finance, because I, worked hard to stay in our lane the other night, and I want to try to do the same thing with theirs. Although I do agree with you, I think there are certainly ways to be creative with that 1.5. As we'll all recall, the 1.5 was set aside by Board of Finances in the past to smooth the Hartford transition. It was actually budgeted for, I believe, once if not twice, but the Board of Finance never actually went and did the transfer. So, and that was, I believe, back when the state was talking about giving us $2.5 million or more in costs. So it's actually, I mean, technically it's designated pennies from heaven that we didn't actually use it from a designated standpoint. So I think there's a potential there for Amy and Maria to talk to the rating agencies and talk to the Board of Finance about how this is an appropriate usage of that money, different than general fund appropriations, what they've been talking about. But I think, for tonight, you're right. We need to talk about our operating budget. I think we need to prioritize our cash. And I think there are some good solutions on the table to look at. The problem we have is, and I want to emphasize this to the board, because Amy and Maria obviously have been talking about it all week with Melissa, we have to go to debt service of 7% over the next 3 years, right? 2022 is when we have to get there. We don't have to go up 22% this year to 6.7%. If we want to spend the same amount of cash, we have to go up. But if we can find ways, as you suggested, with the alternative cash sources or cutting projects, we can limit the debt service increase this year. The Board of Finance can. The problem is that no matter what the Board of Finance does this year, in 2022, the budget debt service number will say 7%, because those are the outstanding bond obligations and interest that we must pay back. So that cash cushion that Maria and Amy have been advising us about goes away. So part of this exercise tonight, and the reason I'm saying this, is we need to really dig deep about what are our priorities, what can not only go to next year, but what do we want to do and how do we want to get there? And again, we're being creative with LoCIP, we're being creative with TAR. Maybe they're going to be there in the future, they're not. But I ask everybody to think about this in a 3-year context as best you can, even though we are talking about 1 year. Because the decisions we make tonight just continue to limit our ability we will have zero cash from a debt service standpoint unless the foundational 7% is changed at the Board of Finance level. And there doesn't seem to be consensus to do that at this point. So, sorry not to belabor, but I just want, again, there's the big mill rate problem, there's the debt service problem, and then there's obviously limited things that we can do on the operating side. So, and thank you for you three and obviously all of town staff being there supporting me for a very long discussion. I got to throw the hand grenade, and then town staff got to clean it up for me and clarify some of the numbers. And I thought it was despite the fact that it was a long night, I thought it was a really good team effort, and I appreciated having you guys there for me. I will say, if anybody's interested, don't spend your time on the 3 hours and 45 minutes. Tune in around 3 hour 46, because that's when it really got fun.
Eric and Sean and Maria, can I just ask one other assumption? Are we, I've been operating under the assumption that the Board of Finance would like to move surplus to, up more towards 15-17%. Is that an assumption that we're making or not making?
That didn't actually seem to be the case.
No? Okay.
Interesting. There wasn't, again, strong consensus out of that meeting on what that number should be. I think some board members, expressed that might be too much, and others felt that it wasn't enough. But there really wasn't consensus yet that's emerged on that issue.
Okay, so that's still an open item.
It is, I would say
Okay.
so.
I don't think we actually had, so to speak, had time to get to that, because the other numbers were more of a emotional flashpoint.
Although they referenced it several times.
They danced on it a little bit. There was some confusion on the changing the 98.5 collection to the actual 99.5 or higher.
Yeah.
So essentially, if they don't do anything different and they tax at the full rate that we've suggested, I believe our undesignated fund balance is going to go up near, 15, 16 over the next year plus?
That'll be 14 if we use the 1.5. If we don't use the 1.5, then we get to 16.
Right, so, and again,
Yeah.
there were two board members that were very hesitant to continue to create the reserve transfer hole, which was in direct contrast with two other members. So it's going to be interesting to see. Now, the hole is there, whether we want it or not.
Right.
My recommendation to the Board of Finance next week is going to be thoughtfully decide how you want to fill that hole in. Do you want to fill it over in 1 year and go to 6, 7, or do you want to fill it in over 3 years as you get to 7%? I don't know what the right answer is. There's a lot of ways to do it.
Right, yep.
But I think if we give them our thoughtful prioritization tonight and dig as deep as we can, I think we've done our part of the bargain. One of the members did strongly suggest that we bond for paving. I don't agree. That makes the problem worse over the next 3 or 4 years. It doesn't make it better. I'd rather pay cash or find ways to do that. Again, that's my opinion. But there was a strong sentiment for that, which was in stark contrast to the guidance we got 2 years ago, which said stop bonding for paving.
Yeah.
And that was recognized.
Yep.
But the individual was trying to give us some help with figuring this out.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they know they're staring down a 4% plus with us. There's potentially the Board of Education using the non-lapsing funds to get closer to 2. And then it all comes down to the debt service number. But unfortunately, taxes are going up. And that was very apparent to them the other night.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
No, thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Sean.
I'd propose we put the worksheet up. It'd be helpful to understand where we're starting from, both from a mill rate increase and also what it means for a median homeowner.
So there's the level.
So we're starting with our presented, correct?
This is what we
As
shared with the
presented,
Board of
yeah.
Finance, if I'm understanding correctly.
Oh, I thought you wanted the reduction.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
No.
Yeah, this is the scenario with the reductions.
Oh, okay, I'm
Oh, it
sorry.
is?
Oh, you can hold that up too.
So this is what was shared with the Board of Finance with the updated Board of Education health insurance decrease. And then with the revised grand list increase.
So if we do our proposed 475, the Board of Ed's, what was it, 2.6, 2.3, whatever it was. But that doesn't include their non-lapsing usage.
Right.
So there's another 300,000 or 400,000 there, which the Board of Ed gets to decide. And then that includes the full going up to 6.7 or the 22% increase on debt service, right?
Right.
Okay.
That's when they
Going
all
up
got
to where
applied.
with debt service, Sean?
The
Going up
full
to-
6.7% that
6.7,
we
okay.
recommended.
So this is the healthcare from 14 to 12?
This with.
Yes.
This is 14 to 12, okay.
No.
No, this
No.
is,
No,
this is the
this
Board of
is-
Finance, so. that's
Right.
This is
14.
purely what we shared with the Board of Finance, where
You
we
guys are
started
confusing
from on
me.
Tuesday.
With the exception of the grant list growth and the Board of Ed reduction to 12% in the health insurance.
Okay. Any questions here before we move to the next one? Okay, do you want to pull up the other one? Okay.
So, if.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of key points for the assumptions, just for getting the conversation going this evening. Again, we updated our analysis, so this reflects if we were to go with the revised scenario of a 12% increase in premiums for the town as well as the Board of Education. We were able to calculate the number for both the BOE as well as the town. This includes the updated projection on the grand list growth. So I would say those are probably two of the key factors in this particular mill rate calculation. And then, Eric, should I walk folks through
Yeah,
potential increases, decreases? Sure.
Yeah, I thought it'd be helpful to look at the
Sure.
assumptions that are in here.
Sure. So based on some of the feedback that we received at the Board of Finance level, as well as, feedback from this board, I wasn't sensing a strong interest in reducing services at this point. So we went through and again, sort of did our best to pull out potential items. So one, we heard quite a bit of pushback from the Board of Finance for your initiative for the EDC around the marketing and branding materials. If we were to pull that out, that's about an $18,000 savings, and that's reflected in this update. Another possibility we have in here is that, again, we felt very strongly that the library department could use additional admin assistant support hours. We do have a much smaller department that has a much smaller scope than they used to in years prior. So one possibility would be to take a 30-hour-a-week admin assistant position in a different department, reduce that to 25 hours a week. That reduction would create enough savings to pay for the increase in library hours, so you'd be able to do that service enhancement without having a budgetary impact if we were to make that. That's about a $7,953 savings if we were to make that change. For the operating budget, another piece we heard from the Board of Finance is, as you all know, you ratified the police contract at your March 11th meeting. And so they wanted to see us take the money we budgeted in contingency for settlement of that contract and move it to the salary item within the police budget. That figure is $77,546. Again, that's not going to have an impact on the budget. It's just a coding change. Again, moving that out of contingency and putting that into the police salary line item. And those were the operating budget changes. For CNR and capital, again, looking at the CNR projects, the only item in there I believe that you could perhaps categorize as discretionary, discretionary being something that's not maintaining a piece of your existing infrastructure or assets, was the wayfinding signage. So a $15,000 savings in cash there, potentially. For capital, again, maybe looking at our bike path maintenance, just based on capacity and workload, I think that's a particular project that we could push out a bit. If we were to reduce that to about $100,000 even, that would provide a $64,910 savings, again, in cash for capital. And another possibility, again, looking at the paving costs. Potentially, again, we had proposed using about $605,500 in cash to pay for paving in addition to Town Aid Road and LoSiP. As Sean mentioned, a Board of Finance member had said to consider bonding. If we can avoid that, I would strongly recommend that we avoid bonding. So if we were to use another revenue source, such as make a recommendation to the Board of Finance that we use part of that assigned fund balance from the Hartford, use $605,000. Again, that does provide direct mill rate relief because, again, otherwise that would have been cash coming out of the general fund to pay for paving.
This doesn't include that yet, though, right?
I believe, did we include that? The $605,000? It does include that. Again, just for sort of illustrative purposes, just to sort of get the conversation going. And then lastly, the Board of Finance did not take the manager's recommendation or the Board of Selectmen's recommendation. So the Parks and Recreation Special Revenue Fund. So again, right, we sort of recommended one of two approaches is that, right, we put it all in the Special Revenue Fund or we put it all in the General Fund. They decided for now just to keep things status quo. But in doing so, by pulling out those expenditures and putting them back in the Special Revenue Fund, the Special Revenue Fund actually would have a deficit still, even with the staffing reduction of about $30,000, which then means in order for that budget to be balanced, we would need to increase the contribution to the Special Revenue Fund by about $30,000. So where the other items were reductions, that's an item that would actually be a cost, right? So we took all of those scenarios, just again, into account for discussion purposes, to try and get the conversation going to see what that would look like in terms of a mill rate impact, as well as an impact on our median valued single-family home. And so with that, we would be looking at a tax impact of about $259 on the median valued home, or a 3.32% increase. And that would be a mill rate of about 37.63 mils.
And that's about $21 a month for the median home. Okay.
What's interesting is one member of the Board of Finance was particularly fixated on COLA this year, right? What is it, 2.8?
COLA.
COLA increase.
Holding COLA to be the threshold.
One board
That was-
member in particular was very concerned.
And it is a concern. I mean, based on what we heard earlier with those folks that are on fixed incomes and struggling, you know, if your income only goes up 2.8% and the tax rate goes up 3.3, you know, where else does it come from?
Where does it come from?
So, this gets us a lot closer to that, which might be more palatable. And again, we're not doing this, as I articulated to the Board of Finance, we represent the entire town. And, you know, unfortunately, sometimes taxes do have to go up because residents demand services, they demand their streets being plowed, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, that was not lost upon them either. And Chris, I apologize, Chris Kelly, we did try hard on the special revenue fund.
Oh, I'm sure you had a good time with that one.
What I did get agreement on camera, while there was no vote, was that the Board of Finance will actually take the recommendation this next time around.
Working group?
If we do get the band back together, because we did this once and we made a recommendation and it was not implemented.
Right.
Because it was not favorable to the mill rate calculation that year, so.
Right.
Again, you know, I was all for serving on a committee yet again, but that committee had to actually listen, or you know, we all had to actually do what the committee recommended to solve the problem.
Yep.
Otherwise, there's no point in doing it again.
I knew you would have given it a good fight. I look forward to watching that part
I
of the,
channeled my inner
meeting.
Kelly, I was
Yep.
respectful.
Sean's getting ready to go back and say, I told you so.
So I asked Amy and Maria to build in these assumptions as a starting point to, you know, to begin the conversation. So from there, I wanted to see what feedback there was.
Amy, do me a favor. I just need to see this. Can you, in that 600,000, can you just dump another, what is it, another 350 or whatever it is in there? That's the non-lapsing account, right? I know that's not ours, but I'm just interested to see. I know it's technically not our job, but give or take. It doesn't have to be perfect right now. It's just,
Sure.
yeah, okay. Thank you. So, yeah, not our decision, but the Board of Finance has a lot of levers to pull here, and they're gonna make the best decision to pull. But again, they asked us to really prioritize capital and dig deep on that, and then look at our operating budget.
Yeah. So I guess I can start with capital. I think what I'm struggling with is the wayfinding signage is obviously an easy one to cut, but it's only $15,000. And the other items are just really fundamental things that we need to do to maintain our existing infrastructure. And if there are items that staff came to us and said, look, I think we could put this off a year or two, I think we could have that conversation, but that's not the feedback that I've gotten. So I don't know how to go about an honest exercise of prioritizing those items when at least I'm hearing that they need to be done.
Can we have a list? Do you have the list of the items so we can all look at them at the same time and?
One moment.
Are you saying, Eric, as you're doing that, you find that the EDC materials are absolutes?
So the EDC materials, the $18,000,
But you put in the category of not that much, just like signage is 15, it's not that.
well,
So-
nothing's that much until you add it together.
Right, so I just want to get the perspective of what the litmus,
The Board of Finance is gonna cut that, whether we cut it or
Yeah.
not.
They already objected to that. so.
Cheryl, did you want a listing of all the capital?
Well, I'm just a list of the things that
Proposed
we need
things,
to
yeah.
prioritize in the,
Yeah.
The 18,000 for economic
I
development.
mean, if we had to list them, top
It's in
to
the,
bottom.
it's in the budget book. too.
What number is it?
Sure, it's tab 25 is
Okay.
the CNR, which again, there is some cash in the CNR. And then tab 26 is the capital, so those are your items that are
Those are
generally
the big list,
$250,000.
I'm listening, Eric.
Yep, so tabs 25 and tab 26.
Yeah.
There are going to be other ways that we can
Accomplish
fund the
thing.
creation of
Yep.
those materials.
Good.
The big
All right.
long list.
Yeah, that one's easy. I think we need to talk about sidewalks. I know we have a plan. I'm not suggesting we continue the sins of the past, but is there a way to phase it in? I mean, you know, we're looking at a capital program for a problem for a long time, and do we go to 200? Do we go to 150? Do we go to 250? I don't know what the right number is. We have to do them. And I agree we have a study and we have to get there, but, I mean, you know, as I look at it, you know, it's a difference between maintaining a plow which, I don't know, I mean, there's no good answers here, but that's potentially a place to, again, I think we're being penny wise, pound foolish, but still think we need to look at it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think if I'm remembering the
thought of that
presentation
today,
we had, that we looked at, if there's a 15-year timeframe.
Correct.
On on that, and I think some of the conversation on the board was really 15 years. We can't do it faster than that. And I
Agreed.
guess if we bring down the 300,000, that's only going to push
stretch
that
it out.
timeframe
Honestly,
back.
I think sidewalks are a higher priority, safety-wise, than, signage or some of the other, even, playscapes or stuff. I mean, the sidewalks around our schools are in desperate need of repair. And I'm concerned, every day when I see those kids walking down, or they're in the road because the sidewalk is not passable. So I really would hesitate to reduce that number.
My fear is if we don't manage the reductions, they'll get done for us.
I understand that, but I could, I think, that's why I was
Yeah.
trying to put a list
Yeah.
all together in one
So-
place, so we could, shuffle them in a manner that was a meaningful priority.
And they didn't push back on the sidewalks, but
Yeah,
they also, understood the need for the accounting system. I mean, I like the suggestion of cutting back the greenway improvements, but you can argue the same thing from a safety and a tree or chipping there.
Absolutely, yep.
Sure. And what's tough about the capital budget, again, as we said, this was really just basic infrastructure, is that outside of the $50,000 for the capital reserve, there are only 4 projects on here. It's such a small number of projects. It's sidewalks, it's paving, it's the bike paths, and it's the accounting system. So it's tough to prioritize when there's so few projects.
I know, but we gotta put a 1, 2, 3, or 4, I think. Again, it was very clear, they want a 1, 2, 3, or 4 out of us.
That's what I was hoping for, is
And we've done it in the
seeing
past.
the list.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, I think it's accounting.
Accounting.
To me, it's accounting, it's sidewalks, it's greenway, and then it's the 50K transfer.
There are parts of the greenway that really need work when you talk about safety.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of intrigued, Sean, with your initial proposal of looking at sidewalks. The amount that we're putting into that. The south side of the greenway really needs quite a bit of maintenance.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
But is that part of the greenway worse than some of the sidewalks by the school? And-
Yes.
And that's where I'm coming down. I almost think the sidewalks, either we're gonna have to prioritize doing different areas, and do some of it, some
Well,
of
I-
each.
I think we've asked our Public Works to prioritize the areas, and that's how we got to this number. This was not, taken lightly.
Yep.
They were supposed to be, the highest need areas first.
I mean, I agree. I mean, but, then if we flip to the other line item, so we're gonna put off the infrared asphalt trailer for 37. We're gonna skip the plow blades. We're not gonna buy the pickup truck. I mean,
Those are all things we're buying eventually.
I know. I mean,
Well,
this
how
is the
much-
game we have to play every year.
Yeah.
It's how long can we make them stretch and,
Right.
I mean, we could, for example, with sidewalks, if folks wanted to say, let's push that number out to 20 years, if you gave us, a moment to sort of do that calculation, we could look at, an alternative to push that out again to a longer term that you might be more comfortable with, 20 years, 25 years, and then kind of come up with what a new number would look like for those 6 years in the CIP. I mean, that's something we could sort of put pen to paper and do some quick math if you wanted us to take a quick break and do that.
Do we have any excess in salt, sand, supplies, anything?
I haven't gotten there yet, on the
Oh.
operating side.
Sorry, I'm anticipating it.
Right, so we did have a bit of a buildup in the reserve in Town Aid Road, which again, when trying to pay for paving in cash, which I know ordinarily we don't do that, that was a proposed revenue source for us within the capital budget. We had proposed allocating around $245,000 from Town Aid Road to be applied towards paving for the current year.
How much in tar do we have?
Let's see, that's a good question, the balance, I don't have that number off the top of my head. Our
I'm not suggesting we spend it to zero. but-
Town Aid Road.
I think it was like 700,000.
Right, and we're expecting an appropriation next year that's pretty level funded.
Yeah, because we got 100 this year, we got 600 next year, 347, so we're all over the place with that. I'm not suggesting any of it's wrong, it's just unfortunately, this is where we're at. Because, I mean, you can not use tar for certain things and allocate that more towards paving, or allocate it towards the public works truck replacement. I mean, right? If we think the truck's the highest priority, then we buy the pickup truck and then, or the plow truck, and then the other stuff goes. But it's not as high of a priority, right?
Yeah, but the plow truck's already coming out of operating, and that's something that the Board of Finance was very strong that it stayed in operating. So I think the plow truck is kind of set.
So that's going back in operating? So if it's going back in operating, I mean, we're back up.
Yeah.
We're only gonna tax everybody for it.
Well, you're still taxing because it's a different line item within the entire budget, so it still impacts the mill rate, just it doesn't impact your 4.7.
But if you use town aid road for it, you're not taxing people for it.
Right. I mean, perhaps if you do want to try and do a 1, 2, 3, 4 outside of paving, maybe it would be good to start with paving to see if there is consensus and making a recommendation to the Board of Finance to use some of that assigned fund balance from the Hartford leaving to pay for that $605,500 in paving costs. That, again, that's once you deduct from the 1.185, take out the LoCIP funds, take out the town aid road, that leaves $605,500. If you feel comfortable making that recommendation, then perhaps from there prioritizing, 1, 2, 3, 4 for the remainder of the items that are on the list.
So just to be clear, they also want our prioritization for all the small stuff too.
For the CNR,
Yeah.
let's say.
And that's gonna be harder.
Just remind, were they asking or proposing that we use the Hartford money?
No, they realized halfway through the meeting they still had it.
And there was
so
some
this is-
conversation around what would be an appropriate use of those funds. Again, and there was some conversation, some members felt it could be immediate tax relief, others felt uncomfortable with that because, again, they felt that we should be using those funds for routine operating expenses versus using it for capital perhaps, or health insurance reserve. So there were a number of items that were discussed as possible uses for that, but they themselves did not land on a particular, area or areas
Right.
that could be
Okay.
used, yeah.
Yep.
I would like to avoid using it for tax relief this year because that happened 2 years ago when we were supposed to get car tax reimbursement, which we didn't get, and that created a cliff the next year where taxes had to go up
Right.
dramatically.
And that's what
to-
two members
to
were
in-
worried about.
Yeah,
But remember, we've got a cliff no matter what because of the debt service number.
okay.
So I'm not suggesting we ignore it, it's just how do they want to phase it in?
Well, I would like to see us conceptually use some of that 1.5 million, or suggest it gets used to backfill the health insurance shortfall. I think that's going to have a huge long-term impact on what the town's doing. Now, how much money that is, I don't know. And frankly, whether finance goes along with us or not is a second, not a secondary consideration, but is a consideration. Would there be any appetite, do you think, from the Board of Finance to use some of that money for the accounting system?
I think ultimately they want our priority, and I think they're gonna figure it out. But
Yeah,
Okay.
I think they really want 1, 2, 3, 4.
And again, there was a lot of conversation specifically around the funding source for paving. So that was why I thought I could bring this to you as a possible recommendation or option, at least for consideration around paving. Because again, there was a lot of conversation from them around funding that particular item as opposed to the other items.
Yeah.
And that's back to your comment about potentially bonding, looking at bonding?
That was what one member did suggest is, would the board consider bonding as a recommendation on, the 605,000 that's remaining?
Yeah, definitely not desirable from my point of view, but.
No.
So my understanding is the benefit of that would be to provide more immediate mill rate relief.
But it forces us even further above the
Yeah.
7%.
That even creates more
Because
problems.
they're violating their own debt policy,
Yeah.
so.
And we worked so hard to get it out of the bonding.
It's not necessarily relief, it's just mitigation of the
Mitigation.
increase.
Yep.
Right.
What degree the increase is, that's all.
Yeah. So if we were to go back to the 1, 2, 3, 4, I think I reluctantly agree with Sean's 1.
Thank
So
you, I
could-
feel supported.
Sorry, can you-
Well, I reluctantly, because I think it's important, but I understand why it's a 1.
I have no problem with that. I would support that.
That was the software system?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
the software.
Sorry, I just wanted to
System.
confirm
Sure.
software
I mean, I
system,
think,
yeah.
we continue to demand more out of town staff with less. We're operating in a system that was conceived before most of us could vote, let alone go to school. So, I mean, we continue to ask for more and more efficiencies around here. I think we need to step up and make that our priority. And
And there was acknowledgement from some board members of the, that was a realization.
It was an
that
eye-opener
they-
for them.
that They had practical experience with.
Yeah.
Yep, I know.
I'm just wondering if there's a way that we could have the sidewalks on there as, I don't want to recommend that we go to a 20 or 25-year plan, but if the Board of Finance says that we have to go in that direction, then I suppose it's less painful than other decisions.
We were more aggressive on that than many other communities when we looked at that, the 15-year. So I'd like to see what a 20-year would be, or 25-year.
Yeah, if you give us just a couple minutes, we could just quickly run those numbers out.
Take 5?
Yeah, that'd be
No,
great.
well, hold on, let's leave that on the list, because there's probably gonna be more calculations to do. So let's do all the side calculations.
Well,
at once.
theoretically, no matter what the number is on sidewalks, is that the number 2 priority, or is it something else?
I would say, to me, sidewalks are number 2. Where the number comes out is kind of a.
Subject to review, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that, with the review of it.
Okay.
And then I'm inclined to take Maria's recommendation on removing the greenway improvements, the 64, and dropping it to an even 100. So Chris, to your point, we can still prioritize safety issues. Maybe we're not replacing as many pieces of fencing or
Sure.
otherwise.
Yep.
But at least some of it's gonna get done.
That's a good
Yeah, I
point.
think that makes sense.
And then I'm
And that
sorry.
becomes number 3.
And I'm sorry, but the 50K goes.
So at a lower number, that's number 3? So
Got it?
at
Yeah, to me,
100,
it's a
not
3 at
164?
100,000.
Okay. And then 4 would be the capital reserve contribution.
Do we want to keep that, or do we just want to take it?
I'd actually take it, because I think we're gonna need it somewhere else.
So that's the 1, 2, 3, 4 for those, right?
So the one point I would just make with the capital reserve is that we were trying to build up a small amount there for unanticipated, particularly around building emergency needs. We have a boiler go unexpectedly. There are just, particularly with some of our older buildings, there are just pieces that unexpectedly will go down or need replacement. And that if we don't have a capital reserve, we essentially, at that point, need to do one of two things: either go back to the Board of Finance for a supplemental appropriation, or do our best to try to clear it up at year-end transfers. We can certainly use those methods, but I just want you to be aware that if there was absolutely no money available in capital reserve, that we would essentially, if we did have some sort of major systems failure, we weren't expecting that we would either again have to ask for supplemental appropriation or try to clean it up at year end. Again, options we can certainly pursue, but just want you to be aware of it.
No, and
Either way, we're going to have to pay for
Right.
that
Right.
expense.
It's a budget versus using, I mean, we have 14% reserves to some extent for those issues as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, it's really like saying, yes, we should put something in our savings account, but,
We have
no, we can't right now.
Sure. So
We don't
we're
have to
hearing
use
to
that
take
money, put it
take
aside.
that out.
That's,
I don't know if we would, are we proposing we take it
We're
out,
just
or
rather-
if we're just prioritizing for the Board of
I
Finance?
think we take it out. We've got 14% undesignated reserves. We have a savings account if the
Right.
boiler goes. It's a two-step process versus a one.
I think that's
Is
a
my
fair
only
argument.
thing.
I would support that.
I'm all for getting it in there over the period of time.
I mean, it's certainly
we
a
can make that
laudable
adjustment.
goal, but.
That goes to,
I want this operating budget to pass without a cut in services, and I want the important capital items to survive. And again, I'm not bowing to the Board of Finance, but
Exactly. Everybody gets their own
with
part.
14% reserves, I'm having a hard time
Yeah,
in this year. I understand the
Yeah.
policy, I agree with it, I get it.
Got it. All right,
But if they don't
noted.
want to fix a boiler, then I'll run against them, because that's insane. We have to fix the boiler, right? I mean,
Okay.
Are we gonna discuss the operating expenses before you all go recalculate, or we're just?
yeah.
And then again, so I've got just to recap, software system, the accounting system would be your number one priority, followed by sidewalks. We'll also take a break to see what that would look like to stretch it to a 20-year plan.
Yep.
Greenways reducing to 100,000 even as your third priority on capital. And then was I hearing consensus on the paving piece in terms of recommending use of the unassigned fund balance, or was there other thoughts on how to fund that $605,000? Really, I think at this point it would be, bond money, use of the assigned fund balance, or potentially use of unassigned fund balance.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think if we have to shove it in the priority list, it's 1A and accounting is 1B.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I would not be in favor of moving to the bonding option for that.
No.
Okay.
That'll bug them a little bit that there's a 1A
well.
and a 1B, but they're of equal priority. I mean, they should be in competition with each other.
They shouldn't.
All right, so got it. So we'll say paving with the use of assigned reserve.
So we're only towing that out of our lane a tiny little bit, but
And it's just a recommendation.
it's a recommendation.
It's just a
It's
recommendation.
thoughtful recommendation.
Yep.
Yeah, supported by our professionals.
Okay.
Should we
Now,
move on? Yeah, sorry, Maria.
before we move on from capital,
We gotta do CNR.
if you just want us to cost out the sidewalk piece, maybe, and we can, at least that way, capital will be done and we can move on to CNR or to operating. You could just give us a few minutes to work on that sidewalk number.
Sure.
Okay, great, that'd be helpful, thank
Okay.
you.